folks, welcome back once again to Indaba, Africa. Well, all of you fans out there from Durban are big Shark supporters. You'll notice what I'm wearing today. As much as it pains me as a Stormers Western Province fan, here I am wearing a Sharks jersey. Now, why might that be? Well, aside from the fact that I wear lots of different rugby jerseys, ladies and gentlemen, the reason I'm wearing this jersey today is because my guest on this special feature today is Gareth Mason, a massive rugby enthusiast and a really popular YouTuber who does some really amazing things, also a sports journalist. Gareth will be on in just a moment, so I'll introduce him. But I want to say to everyone out there, welcome, wherever you may find yourself around the world today, whether it's on the Emerald Isle of Ireland, somewhere in the Republic of Ireland, up there in Northern Ireland, which still remains part of the United Kingdom, along with Scotland and Wales and England. There you go, folks. Anyone on the continent there, find yourself in Germany, the Netherlands perhaps, or France even. And around the world, far out in the east, we find folks in Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, on the land of the Kiwis in New Zealand, and in the land of Oz or Australia. Lots of folks out there watching this stream. So thank you so much for tuning in. And closer back to our interest in Africa, those in Africa, whether you're listening in Botswana or in Namibia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, wherever it may be in Southern Africa, Dumela, Botswana, Sawubona, South Africa, Goeiedag. How is everybody doing out there? Welcome to Chris Wide Africa on this lovely Sunday afternoon, August 2nd. Can you believe that? It's August, ladies and gentlemen. Who stole 2020? Did the Grinch steal 2020 from us? Well, I think in the form of a pandemic, the Grinch has stolen 2020 from us. So we'll get, without much further ado, I'm going to get into Gareth Mason. For those who don't know him, you can check out his channel. I have put a link just below this video. Take a look right below there if you want to check out his channel, but I do it after our stream, and you'll find some really fascinating, really exceptional rugby videos. And so while I love to talk about politics and about events around the world and culture and science and astronomy, speaking of which today, folks, Bob and Doug are coming back from the International Space Station. They're already on their way back. They'll be touching down later this afternoon here on the East Coast of the U.S. Looking forward to that. That'll occur most likely during my Night Owls live stream. If that does take place then we'll pick it up and we'll follow that during the Night Owl stream. But anyway, so one of my favorite topics, absolute favorite topics, is rugby. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring my guest in, Gareth Mason, who's from South Africa. He lives in the Eastern Cape. And we are going to talk about rugby right here on Chris Wide Africa. So let me get Gareth back in the conversation here. Going to admit him in there. And then we'll go from there. There he is. He's coming in now. Hey, Gareth.
Hey, Chris, how you doing?
I'm fine. How's it on your side?
Very good, thank you. All good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on your show.
Well, that's awesome. You got a much bigger following on YouTube. I take that as a compliment. If you're excited to be on my show.
No, I enjoy your work. It's very interesting and informative. So I'm very happy to be here.
Well, thanks a lot. As I mentioned, Gareth, I don't think he's watching the stream right now because bandwidth constrictions. So we're trying to make sure he has a good signal. But I mentioned in the introductions, Gareth, that I'm wearing that dreaded Sharks jersey. Let me stand up there.
Dreaded. It's a gorgeous jersey. I mean, it looks so good on you.
Actually, I will confess that this is one of the better Sharks jerseys. I do like this one. Of course, the problem I have with all these sports jerseys is that I'm really annoyed that I have to be an advertising billboard for all the sponsors. You know, let's make the shark emblem a bit larger so people can see it, and reduce the size of the cell C. But I have to admit that when the Sharks had the Mr. Price sponsorship, I couldn't bring myself to buy one of those jerseys.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of people. The nice thing with the cell C, it blended in with the white in that first, because that was one of the first ones, so it actually suited it. But the Mr. Price was for a long time because it was before red, and then it changed to Mr. Price and all that. So it was different getting used to it, but I still bought them and I still wore them proudly. So, but I do enjoy the later ones.
No, I got you. This one is quite lovely. I really enjoy this. So anyway, folks, if you haven't figured out, I'm wearing the Sharks jersey today because Gareth is a massive Sharks supporter. Now, Gareth, I must admit that the only time I've ever really been much of a Shark supporter is when Bismarck and Yanni du Plessis played for the Sharks. Then I actually enjoyed the style of play, and I'm a huge Bismarck du Plessis fan, so it was easy for me to follow them.
Yeah, no, Bismarck, I mean, he's one of the world's best. I mean, he was outstanding in every aspect, not just physically. He was just tough. And Yanni alongside with him, I mean, you wouldn't believe he's a doctor, but another physical force who just took it to the ability. And in those days, I mean, the Sharks were at their strongest with the likes of Bismarck and Yanni, and it was really phenomenal what they produced for that team.
No, absolutely. Let me say hello to a few of the folks in the stream, and then we'll get into some questions, Gareth. So Futsarko's here, Sky, Greg T, Hendrik de Klerk. I think Hendrik de Klerk is a friend of yours, or am I mistaken?
Yes, he is. Yeah, know him very well.
All right. Sharon Westfall, Let's see who else we got here. Tunes Ruud, welcome Tunes. Sharon, I already said Sharon. General Inflatables has made it today. Welcome, General Inflatables. I always get this wrong. Jansa Siseding. Eugene Rodman. And who else we got there? Tess Anderson. Welcome, Tess. Gareth, you are an Italian, she says.
Italian? No,
not Italian. Nutalian, as in Natalia.
Oh, Nutalian. Yes, Nutalian. Definitely. Fully agree with you there.
All right, well, welcome to those who are in the chat. I appreciate you guys joining us on a Sunday. We're going to relax a little bit here and talk about rugby. And we're just going to start out with me to bring a few topics up and asking Gareth about it. And then I'll give him a chance to ask me some questions. I mean, I suspect he's probably a little bit curious about why this oak from America cares about the Springboks and rugby in South Africa. And
Definitely.
Maybe even more surprised to find out that they even know what rugby is in America. But we'll find out if that's a question he has. Anyway, So Gareth, let's talk very quickly about a question that I think is really important. I've been writing about this for several years on LinkedIn, and also because LinkedIn was the one venue I used on social media while still a serving officer and active duty in the Army, because it was a professional site, so I just kept the professional things. But I commented a lot about rugby because I tried to promote rugby in the United States, and a lot of the users on LinkedIn are in the U.S. And so one of the complaints I have is that it's difficult to sell people on rugby in the U.S. when we look at one of the traditional powerhouses of rugby, South Africa. And people tune in and they watch venues in which 3,000 or 4,000 people show up for a Curry Cup match, or maybe 10,000 for Super Rugby. And even for the Springboks and the All Blacks, not even full stadiums anymore. It's real. And there's lots of excuses. The tickets are too expensive. There's too much rugby, this and that. But I'm not buying that, because even when the only people who went to games were white people during apartheid, by and large, the stadiums were full. And the number of white South Africans is higher today than it was. And lots of coloreds and lots of black and Indian South Africans love rugby and go to these games. Watch a Stormers game at Newlands. You look at the audience, it's like 20, 30, 40% mixed. It's very diverse. So do you have any concerns about these empty venues, or am I just crazy?
It's actually one of my biggest concerns is the sport. And I think you hit the nail on the head, is why smaller or bigger nations like the States aren't quite interested, because the crowd holds such a key to a game. It brings that extra oomph and atmosphere. And when you hear them singing, you hear them chanting, booing, whatever it may be, it brings a lot of electricity to your household as well as to the stadium in itself. And it's been a concern of mine for quite a long time, because, I mean, like you said, Curry Cup, the quality of rugby that we get within Curry Cup is outstanding, and it deserves more audience, and it's just not getting it. There's so many different aspects to look at it, because I think we always get spoiled the Super Rugby times because our Springboks are playing there. Curry Cup, you're playing, and then it's all the youngsters, and people kind of don't want to really see what's going on there. So I think that's a factor. But ticket prices for me are massive with how ridiculously overpriced they are, especially international games. I mean, for people who, if you could cater to the schools and to the youth, they will definitely flood the place. But you just need to accommodate with ticketing prices. I mean, to go watch a Springbok game, you're paying $500 to $800 for a cheap ticket. I mean, that's behind the poles. For the fancy tickets on the sides where the guys sing and you're facing them, you're paying over the grands. And I mean, for South Africans, that's a hell of a lot of money for us to go on. But also, I think another factor, what you mentioned, there is a lot of rugby being played, and it's one after the other. Timing needs to be reduced. Super Rugby is just too long at the moment. That's one of the biggest problems in the tournament at the moment. And people are bored because they're just seeing the same old thing. All Blacks winning, the New Zealand teams dominating. And it takes away that excitement of what we see in Curry Cup, where it's actually quite competitive. I mean, the Griquas are teams that have been on the top of the log not too long ago. And I mean, that's outstanding achievements that people should enjoy, and especially in those towns and communities support. And we're missing it because I think people are so invested with Super Rugby, they're bored of it. Now it's like, oh, it's Curry Cup. Okay, now we're looking no Springboks. So what's the point of watching? Let's just wait for the international games. So there's many aspects, but it's a massive concern for the sport in general, and not only South Africa. You said it, New Zealand, Australia is even worse, opposed to what we see in Europe, where it's actually very well supported, opposed to here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The European venues are full. I mean, you go to Ireland, Italy is the one place they're not full, but even there, the crowds are bigger than they are in South Africa and New Zealand. even in Italy. And it doesn't matter when the Italians play in the southern part of Italy where nobody really cares about rugby, they still get decent
Yeah.
crowds. It's amazing, and those are the worst crowds in those leagues. The French Pro 14 or Pro, what's the French league? I can't think of it, but
Top
the
14.
top 14, yeah, top 14. They have great crowds. I mean, and players make a lot of money in France. Very quickly, Brett said that Chris White, now is not the time for crowds to be at rugby matches. South Africa has 500,000 COVID. Yes, Brett, we're not talking about right now,
We're
brother.
not doing, yeah.
No.
Talking future.
We're talking future. We're also talking recent past and what's happened. Okay, 2020 is a wash. The Grinch stole 2020. It's gone. So
yeah, he did.
and it's the Olympics is hosed. They may not even happen next year at this rate, but the point, we're not talking about 2020, Brett. You're making a valid point, but that's not what we're talking about. But let me add in there very quickly. You mentioned the Greek was. I was stoked to watch the Greek was. I mean,
Yeah.
other than the fact that they play on concrete, that's their pitch. It's not really a proper. I really love the Greek was. I love of course the Greek was. People are fascinating, and I love the name. But I mean, the last time that they had a decent team was like 1970. So this was very exciting.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And I mean, that should have triggered people to the seats. It should have triggered them to the stadiums. And it sadly didn't. I mean, and also the sad thing with that is you got the Griquas doing so well. Towards the end of the Currie Cup, all the Springboks come back because the rugby championship's over. And now these guys get dominated, which is also unfair. And I think that also frustrates a lot of people is all these youngsters have worked so hard to get to where they are. And now the big boys come back and they automatically drop to the bottom. And then the Griquas get dominated, which is sad. But last year, I think it was last year, the year before, wasn't the case. It was Griquas actually were quite solid. And a lot of people were, whether you support the Sharks or Western Province or wherever it may be, were hopeful for the Griquas to win, just to bring a change into the sport to maybe excite people again. And I think that's what we see with when a New Zealand team gets beaten. I mean, it opens up the tournament a little bit more to give everyone an opportunity, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I tell you, I was really hoping to see the Griquas win the whole thing. I mean, I was so stoked just to see that, because if they won, I don't care what the shipping cost of DHL was going to be. I was going to find a way to get a Griquas jersey.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, their colors are awesome too. That teal color,
Yeah.
I really, it's there's a lot to like about the Griquas, other than the fact that they play on concrete.
Yeah. Jeepers, I do. I mean, when you see the guys play in Newlands or in the wetter areas, you see them slide. When they do that run and jump for a try, it just stops dead, and you don't see them move at all.
Yeah, Brett come back and said that South Africa's economy has been junk status for a while. Many people have not been able to afford the tickets for a long time. Well, I don't disagree with that, Brett, but I'm talking about a phenomenon that's 15 years old, not one that's 5 years old. I mean, the crowds have been dwindling. I went to Bloemfontein.
Yeah, for a while.
I went to Bloemfontein for the Tri Nations, where Mornay Sten scored all of the Springboks points that day, and we spanked the All Blacks. And there were 45,000 people at that arena in Bloemfontein, which nobody wants to go to Bloemfontein. Sorry, Jock. No, but seriously, it was quite a crowd. That's 2000. I think it was 2009 is when that was. Yeah, and from that time, it just started to tail off, and it's got progressively worse. Now, some people make a lot of excuses, and we're not going to talk about it now. We can get into it later about politics and quotas and nonsense like that. But it's not even that. There's a lot of things that affect it. It's not just the economy. There's also I think the biggest thing that's been hit on the head is you mentioned it, and I've talked about it before. And then I think someone else just mentioned it here. Let me see if it was Janse. Janse said stadiums will get full when people become hungry for rugby. Too much rugby, so he agrees with Gareth. I think you and I are both in agreement on that. There's too much rugby, and it's year round. You can watch rugby any time of the year because the Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere, and you have players.
Exactly.
You have players from the Southern Hemisphere who are mainstays and stalwarts in Japan and in Europe, and even now in the U.S. We're drawing players from South Africa and from New Zealand who come, and the islands who come and play here. So
exactly.
It gets to be a bit much. And one of the other things too is that it's had a dramatic impact on player health.
Precisely. I mean, we've seen so many injuries happen, and the big names get injured or can't continue their careers. Or there's guys, for example, let's go to Pat Lambie. I mean, he had such a potential in the Sharks jersey, in the Springbok jersey, and unfortunately, injury took out his career. There's likes of Bobby Skinstad, other guys, Gary Teichmann, if we're going back in time, who had injuries. I mean, Dan Carter, for example, one of the greatest rugby players in the world, Johnny Wilkinson again. They could have been 20 times better if injury didn't happen towards them. But it's again, they're playing rugby throughout the year, from international to provincial. And I mean, we used to super 14, 15, whatever, Super Rugby. we're forgetting that there's Currie Cup, and New Zealand's also got the Mitre 10
The
Cup.
Mitre 10, yep.
So they're just moving into different phases. And I think that's why a lot of these players these days are going on sabbaticals,
Yeah.
so that they can rest and get their bodies done and then come back fully fit. And I think that's what Beauden Barrett seems to be gelling well with the way of rugby, but also going on a sabbatical, while the other guys are continuing to play and adapt to the game. He loses his form. I mean, he hasn't really produced the result in Super Rugby Aotearoa. So there's different ways to look at it.
No, absolutely. I don't know, should I say shocked? Very disappointed, but shocked to hear about the retirement of Bambi. Sorry for that, but I call him Bambi. Well, he looks looks like he's 12 years old.
That's you're true. But a lot of people were saying, and I said it when he left the Sharks. I made a comment saying he's not gonna last. He's had too many injuries, and concussion, sadly, is going to be the reason for his retirement, and it was. I mean, he went over to Racing. He did make a difference, but unfortunately, injuries just cut short a career that could have been great. And that's the thing, and they just don't stop playing rugby. And I mean, for fans, we should be thriving on it because we see it. But at the end of the day, you do get bored when you. I mean, I know it's a crime to say it if you're a big fan, but you generally no interest in European because you've got your South African one, or you watching it, and then there's just no hype. There's no want to have it back. For example, now in South Africa, all of us are longing for the sport to return because we deprived of it. We're seeing Super Rugby New Zealand take off. Australia, not as much, but it's still happening. We're waiting desperately. And I think when we come back, when we get stadiums, of course, when we're allowed back in the stadiums, it's going to be phenomenal. We're going to see a great moment. But the trick is, and this is where SA Rugby and the sporting governing bodies is how to keep that active, how to keep them motivated to continue watching, because you said it earlier before we started the stream. It's also Super Rugby in New Zealand, massive, full stadiums, Auckland breaking records for the first time in years. Now, okay, we've got rugby back. How are we going to adapt to this and keep that hype up?
No, absolutely. No, for me, I think it was the announcement of retirement because of concussions of Sam Warburton. That just absolutely surprised. Yeah, that was to me devastating. Sam Warburton is one of the most engaging and best players in the game, and to see his career cut short like that was so disappointing for me. I was really bummed out about that.
I think a lot of people, because I remember even people coming from the comment section of videos of how gutted they are that a career like that has ended, because they have more years ahead of them, or you'd think.
Yeah.
And seeing an icon like that having been forced out, it's heartbreaking, and especially when they've got more years in them to really end off on their terms as a great. It's now cut short due to injury, which is unfortunate. And that's also the question: is how are we going to improve that so injuries don't end the careers of players? Again, it's too much rugby maybe, but what can we do to better the sport to protect these guys?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely the case. And, you kind of got to have respect, I think, for players who know when the time is right and they've achieved what they can. And so, for instance, but don't necessarily give up on the sport. We see Brian Habana going off and doing other things, being a goodwill ambassador for the game and promoting rugby, which is pretty cool. But then we see Tendai Mtawarira, who retired from Test rugby and rugby altogether, only to announce that he signed with DC and Major League Rugby, which was awesome for DC. Although he got to play like 2 games before it was over, but the point is that an opportunity to bring an internationally recognized name and star, the Beast, to the U.S. Of course, as a Sharks fan, you know who the Beast is, but
of course.
No, but no. So I mean, a lot of respect for Tendai in that respect. That he recognized it was time that he wasn't going to be at that level anymore and go out on top with the trophy. But why give him a rugby when he still has something left in the tank and he can come to Major League Rugby? Which, I'll be honest, it's not at the same level as Super Rugby. It's not at the same level as Pro 14. It's a new league. It's 3 years old, but the quality of rugby is still pretty darn good, and he can make a big impact here. So it's kind of cool to see that. Joe Peterson came over here and played as well.
Precisely, and it has the potential to get better and better as we move forward. And Ma Nonu went over there to the States as well. I mean, those are great who retired because, they were done, but they could still, like you say, have a little bit left in the tank to give back to the sport and to also introduce it to the States, which I strongly believe is the way forward. I know some people say I'm mad when I say that, but there's a lot of potential in it. It's a big country with the good money and the investors that can really help grow the sport to another level. And it will be great to have it within World Rugby, where we see a competitive or a Japanese type USA team that can surprise us and shock us and get better and grow. I think it's good for the sport, and these guys giving back and going over there, I think is a great initiative going forward. And more will do it, I think, going forward as well.
I think it is. It's smart. For instance, like the DC rugby team has got an affiliation with the Scottish Rugby Union, and so that's
There
their
we go.
yeah. That's a smart for a developmental perspective, from theirs. But eventually, it won't be developmental anymore. It'll be a peer sort of thing. But that's down the road.
Yeah.
And then, in addition to that, you see other players. You see like Bastereau came over from France to play for Rugby
There
United New
we
York.
go.
Rugby United New York, which I've never rooted for a single New York franchise in any sport in my life because I detest them. But I'm a Rugby United New York fan. Of course, we got the likes of Ben Foden playing for them, Cathal Marsh.
There we go.
Really, really, really exciting stuff. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of future to that. I was going to get to that topic a little bit later on, but we'll come back to Major League Rugby. You mentioned something early on. We're talking about attendance at arenas, at venues, is that, and this is something I've talked about. If you've got empty stadiums, why aren't you just giving tickets to school kids and youth so they come to the stadium and experience it? Why not do that? You're not going to sell the tickets anyway. I mean, you don't have to announce that you're going to give the tickets out before the match, but you can have an informal policy that if kids show up at the stadium, they can get free tickets and at least do something to fill the seats, because there's nothing more depressing than sitting around the world watching a game you're all excited about and there's 12 people in the stands. That's what we have now because of COVID, but that's a unique situation.
Exactly. No, I fully agree with you, and I think that more needs to be happening, especially for the bigger games. I know they tried desperately with the Southern Kings because obviously the support for them in Pro 14 isn't strong, and tickets have been given away, which works every now and then. But I agree, they need to do it more. I mean, choosing a school, fine, but if you've got no crowd and you want to bring it, give it to all the schools. Say people under the age of X can have an opportunity to come see the Kings and to meet the players, and also think of different marketing ways to bring the fans. I mean, for a person to meet a hero or a star is very important in a youngster or even an adult's life. For me, at the age of 29, if I can see a Springbok that I admire, I met Beast 2-3 years ago, I was like a child. That for me was very important. And if you can introduce interactions like this more and more, people get excited. People want to see. They get to know the person in a type of way, or know they have the opportunity to meet these guys. Therefore, they will go watch the game. I mean, off topic, in cricket, in PE, I mean, we've got a great crowd for cricket because they interact with the players. Kings are starting that, but they're also developing and growing. So not everyone knows the Kings. But having an opportunity to meet these guys could be a marketing way in order to bring more seats, as well as giving out these free tickets to put seats onto the chairs, because I think that's what people are bored at seeing is, we're playing the Kings, they're going to get beaten, but there's no crowd, there's no excitement. And when the Kings or when a team has a crowd, they will generally play better, but they don't have that much atmosphere anymore.
No, absolutely, I agree with you on that. It's really something that needs to be addressed. I mean, if you can't fill the stadiums, just hand those tickets out, get those people in there. Because one of the nice things about the Rugby World Cup, I don't know if you were able to watch it, Gareth, if you saw it in the stands, because, of course, I was in Japan. Sorry, not to rub it in, but I was in Japan. And at a lot of the games I went to, there were massive, entire schools had sections of the stadium. And that was one of the reasons why it was so hard to get tickets, because they reserved them for school kids, which was frustrating. It's frustrating as a fan's perspective, but it was really cool to have like schools, because they wore their school uniforms at the games and they cheered and things. And especially for some of the lesser known teams, you go to games with Russia and I forget who we were playing. Yeah, it was Samoa or something like that. But the venue was full, and of course they didn't take the best seats. They had them at the end or on the sides. But it's a nice atmosphere, and I think it makes a big difference bringing school groups to the arena.
Couldn't agree more. It's definitely the way forward, that we can find ways to bring more people to the stadiums and to also introduce the sport to the schools as well.
Yeah, well, there you go. That's an important part of it too. And we're about in the U.S. Why not do that? Bring school kids in so they learn about the game. I have yet to meet a child that's been introduced to rugby and says, "Oh, I don't like this game. Honestly, my nephew never heard of rugby. I took him to the pro rugby. The last game was ever played. They had one season here. I drove 6 hours to Ohio, and my nephew came up and watched the game with me. And he's like, "This is awesome. How can I play rugby? I want to play." I've never met a kid that said, "Oh, I don't want to play this game. This is silly."
And that's a problem. We've got to introduce the sport.
Exactly. You got to introduce them to it. Sorry about that. Yeah. So we were talking a little bit ago about crowds and about, people getting into it. Listen, at the Vegas Sevens, let me tell you, you're out there all day. It's even though it's wintertime, it's not quite spring. It's still kind of warm at times, and it gets a little windy out there. So the weather goes back and forth, vacillates between comfort and discomfort at times. But it doesn't matter who's playing. It could be the Blitz box out there playing against England and Dan Norton, and you'd have a decent crowd. But you won't have as big a crowd as you have if Kenya comes on the pitch. The Kenya Sevens come out there, and the stadium swells in the general admission seats, and the vibe is completely different. Doesn't matter if the Kenyans are scoring. The crowd is dancing, everyone's singing. And it's not just Kenyans. It's everybody gets into it. It's a lot of fun. And then when the Kenyans do something, the crowd goes nuts. It's like watching the final. And the point there being is that the fans make all the difference at rugby, and I think people miss that point.
Exactly.
Yep.
The power of fans can really change the sport and inspire more to do it. And I mean, I think that's why certain sports that you wouldn't think are entertaining or something. For example, I mean, silly one, but if you look at wrestling these days, a lot of people watch it not just because of the entertainment side, but it's the crowd atmosphere that generates the booing, the chanting, whatever it may be. And I think that comes back to rugby. If more and more can be introduced like that. I mean, NFL, it's massive over there by you guys. Baseball, but I think because you've got a break and that you have to wait for it to come back, I think that maybe generates that excitement again. Okay, cool, we've seen it. Now it's on a break, and then the crowds are in full force.
So let's shift a little bit to Super Rugby. So, of course, we know that there was no professional rugby as such until after the 95 World Cup. That's really when it came into existence. So we first started getting it going. Of course, we know that there were always a history of players being paid under the table sort of thing, but we won't get into that dirty part of history. But the professional rugby era grew after the 95 World Cup, in which the Springboks won there, the awesome World Cup. And the shocking World Cup, nobody expected South Africa to even make it to the final, let alone the
exactly.
That's just like the magic, perfect moment in time, which seems to be forgotten by so many people. But
exactly.
So what I want to say about Super Rugby was fascinating. It came out with Super 12, then it was Super 14, and to me, honestly, some of the best days of competition and the league was best run when it was Super 14. I think that was the most exciting time. When it went to 15, it was fine, but then they expanded to 18 and they went too far. Expansion was too far. You diluted the talent, too many games, too much travel. And then they tried this nonsense with conference play. You only played South African and Argentine teams, and they only played New Zealand teams, and that was just stupid. All that did was cement the All Blacks, or not the All Blacks, but the Kiwis is always winning because no one ever faced them, so you couldn't improve. And then back to the 15s by dropping the Cheetahs, the Kings, and who else did they drop? They dropped someone else. Anyway, they dropped three clubs, an Australian club, the
Western Force.
Western Force, which was one of my favorite clubs. I'm out there in Perth. I love the Western Force. So they dropped Western Force, and the two South African clubs went back 15. To me, Super Rugby has been so mismanaged, so mishandled, and so out of control by the people that are responsible for it at Sanzar that if it dies, it's their fault, not our fault, not the fans.
I agree. 110% agree with you there. And I think that's exactly it. It's almost like they don't know what to do with this product and they're trying everything to try and spice it up, but they're actually destroying the tournament even more. I agree. Pro 14, Super 12 were the best times of the sport. It was entertaining. It was competitive. The conference system, I hate it with a passion. It just doesn't make sense. They need to go back to a round robin where you can play everyone and have the opportunity to beat these guys. And you also don't want to be in a tournament where your top team, and this is what irritated me the most. If we look at the South African Australia Conference, your top guys like the Brumbies were top, but they weren't top. They were like 6th or 7th if you have to go on a full log. Yep. So how is it fair that they are playing for a playoff when they didn't technically qualify? And I mean the same for South Africa. Yeah. It wasn't too long ago where we didn't have many teams. It was just the Lions. Why are the Sharks, for example, if they didn't play well, getting a playoff just because they in the stage? And it's unfair to the other teams who actually are doing better and should be higher up. And that's what destroyed the sport for me. or the tournament is because people were just tired of seeing the same old, same old. What's the point? I mean, Australian rugby, with all due respect, is unfortunately dying off. It's not as exciting as it was. And yet these teams are being forced into playoffs. So the playoffs are getting boring when that should generally bring in your most crowd for the excitement. And no one was interested, I think. And that's what just, for me, they just did too much without even knowing what they were doing. And I agree, the management committee, SANS, are to blame for that.
Well, I would have to say that from my point of view, and I don't know if there's a super chat from the Flying Boar. We get to that in just a moment. But I think, Sansar, I think that they exposed the weakness of Australian rugby when they decided to include the Argentine side. When Jaguars came into the league, now they weren't so great initially, but now they could roll over most of the Australian teams without any effort. It just shows how weak Australian rugby really is.
And some South African teams too.
Well, yeah, no doubt about that. But I'm not trying to beat up on South African teams.
No, sure.
No, but seriously, I think they meant well. But bringing the Jaguars in really exposed the weakness of Australian clubs, and then Australia gets so wrapped up in politics, the Israel Folau controversy. It's just oh my god.
When railing Castle, it's just a negative environment, unfortunately, within Australia, which is sad because they have the potential to provide the goods and the strength within the sport. It's just politics and sport don't go, and I know we'll probably get into that. No. And proof is in the pudding with South Africa, even with Australia, definitely. And that's why the rugby is just dying out. No one's interested in Super Rugby AU. As much as what you would be in New Zealand, because it's competitive, it's exciting, or down here when we start off our league, it's gonna be exciting because it's all guys are going to be wanting to fight for it, and there's no dominance type of thing.
Absolutely. Hey folks, you're listening to Chris Wide Africa on the Indaba Africa channel here. This is a Sunday special feature with my special guest Gareth Mason, a uber enthusiast when it comes to rugby, man with his own rugby channel on YouTube. And if you're curious about that, after the stream, check it out right down there below. I got the link in there this time before the stream. So go check out Gareth. He's got about 20,000 subscribers, and people really enjoy his commentary on rugby. He's also a sports journalist and covers sports in general, but fantastic channel. So we're talking about rugby today and across the board, touching on rugby around the world, but a special emphasis on South Africa. And so you just mentioned Raylene Castle, and I almost hiccuped there and choked when you said that. Not a fan. Not a fan.
Nah, not many.
Yeah, not a fan. So now you have a segment. I don't know if it's actually a segment, but I've seen it on your channel, The Walking Tall with G-Man. Can you tell me where that came from and where, because that's an interesting title for the program.
That's generally my brand name, Walking Tall with G-Man. And the reason why I named it that is because I have dwarfism, which is a condition where a person is smaller with a shorter person. And I've been wanting to create a platform when I was unemployed about 4 years ago. Instead of feeling sorry for myself, not getting a job, waiting, I thought, let me do something. And I created the channel to inspire and motivate people to never give up in life, and to also share my journey through sport, my challenges, being rejected in a team, to actually getting some accomplishments and all that stuff. And through that, ignited the sports side of it. And walking tall, because obviously I'm short, it's just the journey of keeping your head up, standing tall no matter what the challenges are, and bringing that passion and enthusiasm or giving it out to the people when I do commentary, recapping or previewing, or even just motivating people through sharing my story. And that's generally where I created it. It was either going to be stand tall, G-Man, and then I thought, let's go walking tall, because you're constantly moving to the next journey to try and make a difference in life. And that became the brand name of G-Man, or Walking Tall with G-Man.
That's a pretty cool brand name. I like it. Here in the U.S., those who are a bit older may remember a series of movies called Walking Tall about Buford T. Pusser, who was a guy who didn't put up with a bunch of nonsense. He carried a baseball bat. So that will resonate with some older Americans.
The Rock acted in Walking Tall too. I mean, he was part of the movie, yeah.
Well, that's what it's based on. They bring everything back. All the cartoons from the 70s have been redone as movies, and it's funny watching kids from the millennial generation all excited about music that people listened to in the 70s because they see a remix of it and they think it's a new song. I'm like, no, that's from 1973. Not that I was listening in 1973, but so the Flying Board gave a super chat, a $5 Canadian super chat, and says sports have been politicized around the world, including the U.S. and South Africa, and that's why no one wants to go watch it. I think there's a lot of merit merit to what the Flying Boars just said. For instance, I am not watching baseball because of the nonsense they're doing. I've abandoned the NFL again, and that's a shame for the NFL because I used to spend at least $1,000 every year on tickets and subscriptions for watching it and buying kit, and they don't get that money from me anymore because they've insulted me. So I agree with that. I get it. And then we've got this whole mini controversy with cricket players. Well, I wouldn't say mini with cricket players. It's big in South Africa, but a mini controversy with Sia Khaleesi, which led to my biggest viewed video ever. Thank you all for that. But so I agree with the Flying Board that people don't want, and Brett said earlier, people don't want politics. They want to dump their worries and go enjoy a competition. And when you inject politics into sports, realizing it's a business, you probably undermine the business model is what I'm saying.
And that's spot on. And I always go back to the quote from Nelson Mandela when he said, sport has the power to change the world. It is more powerful than governments in breaking down racial barriers. And that's it. And it just shows politics and sport do not go together. You've got to let the game flow the way it goes. No matter how a guy gets into a team or whatever, it's got to be on merit and bringing in the joy to communities, to the people. And go back to where it started, the love of the game, because I think the negativity that politics influence in sport is what leaves a sour taste in the mouth of people. And therefore, you're losing out on stadiums and people are doing sad things to memorabilia or whatever due to certain instances. And that's why it's so important to think before you speak on these type of terms, because, we can't bring something that's totally not got anything to do with sport into sport, because again, it just creates a negative environment where sport is supposed to lift you up, bring you together, unite you together, and it has the power to do that. We've seen it, but constantly bringing other instances that's got nothing to do with it into it, it's a little bit sad. I mean, I get parts of it, but also don't. And if you want to play, you've got to play for the love of the game and not for what others tell you or how you've got to do, because that can either make or break you. And we've seen a lot of careers getting destroyed because they've been thrown into positions where they're not quite ready just yet.
Yeah, no, it's when I met Joel Stransky at the 2019 World Cup, because Talon Stanford, a friend of mine, is a broadcaster for World Rugby and HSBC 7 series. Talon promised, since he was teamed up with Joel Stransky for the World Cup broadcast team, he said, "Hey, I'll introduce you to Joel." I'm like, "All right, thanks, man. That'll be awesome." So we finally linked up in Kobe after the South Africa-Canada game. And Joel seemed more interested in meeting me than me meeting him. Was fascinating. He was fascinated because I've been a Springboks fan since about 1984, and he's like, "Wow, okay." And when I mentioned being a Springboks fan since 1984, like I did in my video about Sia Khaleesi, then of course you get the comments, "Well, then, what are you, just an old white racist or something like that?" And what bothers me about that is that the Springboks weren't created as a racist organization. They were created as a national side and as a club to compete. And they were in a system which did not allow for them to have players for a long period of time. But when they were able to finally start doing it, things began to change. But they didn't create the system. And so people interjected politics into the Springboks. And to say today, if you support a Springboks fan, that you were against inclusion, I think it's just nonsense. And I find it very irritating to hear people say that.
Yeah, I agree, and it's draining that people still think about it. The past is in the past.
Yep.
We can't change what happened. We've got to focus on the future, and in order to create a positive future, it begins with us, the fans, the people, the sports stars, and we can change it in the way that we want by focusing on the positive sides, the good things of sport, why the sport has been created. You're playing not for the negative. You're playing for your country. You're playing for the pride of wearing the badge, the pride of wearing the colors, and unfortunately gets taken away by either politics or negativity or money. And the love of the pride of the sport is sadly going every now and then. And we need to go back to the reason as to why we pick up a rugby ball, why we kick it in our backyard, why we pick up a cricket ball or a golf stick or whatever it may be. It's because we love it, not because we hate it. And there's always beautiful things online where you see people together and youngsters playing together, no matter what the race or belief or religion is. And it's a powerful thing saying, we didn't make the decision of this negativity. You introduced it to us because everyone's so against certain things and have their own thoughts. So if we could just change our mindset and focus on the future of the sport for the right reasons, sport will pick up again and will take off. But we keep constantly going to the negative. We can't change the past, sadly. As tough as it was, as hard as it was for certain people, it's not my fault that it was history. I was born into the world. Now I try and bring out the positive side, which is very hard because not everyone wants to hear that. But you got to keep going for what you believe in and go for the love of the game again.
No, absolutely. Got another super chat here. I'm going to mention that, and then Gareth, if you indulge me a little bit, I'm going to run through several comments people made. Then we'll address
Go
those.
for it.
Okay, so the Flying Boar once again, $5 super chat said what ruins sports in South Africa is. Oh, and he just did another one, so I'll have to get that afterwards. Said in South Africa is racial quota system, for example, cricket. Yeah, no, I when under now I don't blame Alistair Coetzee for this because it was SARU, the South African rugby unit, was responsible. But when it was clear under his tenure that the system was going towards 50% of players must be black players, I came out loudly and spoke quite critically and vociferously against SARU and expressed my anger because players should be picked on merit. The bigger problem I have with South African rugby is not that, but the bigger problem is that most players who make the Springboks come from a traditional rugby feeder school system in which they go to a small number of schools, and that's where people go to look for the talent. The fact that Peter Steph du Toit is made it as a Springbok, became the player of the year, is not shocking, but it's a little surprising because he went to a small school that nobody knows about, nobody comes from there, and when I say rugby's diverse, he grew up in a very different situation. Now, he grew up in a life of privilege. His father owns a vineyard, and he grew up in wealth. When I talk about diversity, but he grew up in a different worldview and grew up in a different rugby worldview from a school that wasn't a traditional rugby powerhouse where people didn't come from that became Springboks. And when I say diverse about Siya Kolisi, it's not that he's black or that he comes from the Eastern Cape. It's that he grew up in poverty and he grew up initially in a disadvantaged situation, but then someone helped him out and he grew up in privilege and he brings a different view to the game and a different style of play. That's diversity for me. So when they talk about quotas, just to get, well, we got one of these, we got one of those, we got one of these, look how diverse and inclusive we are. That's utter nonsense. And that's the problem I have with the quota system. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, Gareth, or we can save that.
Well, just in the quota, I mean, yeah, I fully agree with everything you said there. And I think there's such a difference in the two, is quota and transformation. There's a massive difference between the two, and people confuse it, unfortunately, because of the quota. Quota is obviously, like you said, when people get thrown into a team when they're not ready or due to a ruling by politics. Transformation is bringing the sport to the communities, to introduce it to them and educate the sport and to show them how to play. It rather play sport than lead to crime or to drugs or whatever it may be. Transformation is educating the sport to the communities, through that giving them the opportunities to play club, provincial, whatever it may be. Big difference. Quota is politics. Transformation is educating the sport to the communities, to the townships. What we've seen, and we've seen greatness from it, and that's what we need to also remember. There has been great success stories, but that's transformation, not quota system. And yeah, that's just the big thing that gets me, is people don't get the difference. When people talk about transformation, it's not quota. It is educating. Quota is politics.
Well, in fact, Gareth, to follow on the theme before I get to the comments, is that's been an argument I've been making for several years before the Coetzee era, and then since then, because I was kind of a fan of Henneke Meyer, so I'll just say that. But anyway, but I'm still angry that they let him go, but I understand why it happened. But I've been saying for a long time is if SARU was serious about transformation, then they would be in neighborhoods, they would be in townships, they would be in the rural countryside of KZN, they would be in the northern province, and they would be introducing the game to youth. If you want black kids to play, you've got to tell them about the game. You've got to have officials. You've got to have a pitch. You got to have a ball out there. You got to have people explaining how to play the game, and you've got to get out there. And then you got to give free tickets to sporting venues so kids can go watch the games. That's what you have to do. That's how you grow the game. You don't grow the game by picking a few select players that somebody happened to notice and they got a chance to get a scholarship to go to school, and now they get up, okay, well, now we got Habana, so we got our black player. That's nonsense. That's utter nonsense. Because he's colored anyway. He's not black.
Exactly. And by sharing that success story of the success of it, it will inspire and motivate other people. Whereas if you see a player that's not there on merit, it just leaves a sour taste. And there's a few players that have had that instance. But if you look at Sia's story, I mean, the success of that story is positive and motivating, inspiring through transformation by giving him the opportunity and educating the sport within. And that should be celebrated. That should be advertised more. And yeah, it's just there are two different ways at it, but transformation is so important, but for the right reasons.
No, absolutely, I agree with that. That's but that's to me has been the singular failing of Saru. I mean, other than the mismanagement
Agreed.
of Super Rugby and Curry Cup and all these other things, the singular failure has been that for 26 years. I mean, it shouldn't even be an issue now. I mean, rugby is such an awesome game. I mean, look,
Precisely.
I see kids in Vegas who come for the varsity tournament. There's a massive varsity tournament when the sevens was out there that wasn't part of the sevens, but they ran at the same time because people would come out for both. And all these school kids around the country. And I watched Life University, which is a big sevens. They have a big sevens program. It's a medical school here in Georgia. But Life University is well known in the sevens circuits here in the U.S. And they recruit and give scholarships to their school. And Life University recruiting inner city kids from Los Angeles, black kids who were playing rugby out there. And this one girl who was just amazing, and the rest of the kids on the pitch were kind of, and so she was, her ability was accentuated, but she was good. And so they were trying to recruit her out of high school to give her a scholarship. And I'm standing there listening to the conversation, listening to the recruiter. Same sort of thing you hear with football players and baseball players in America for decades. Now I see it happening with this. The point is that if you want people to be involved in the game, they have to know about it. You can't simply artificially pick people, and I think that's the bottom line with that. So let me get to some of these comments real quick that I promised to get to here. So let me see. The first one I want to say is that Henk Adunze said that it's going to get worse for rugby if the players get behind this BLM movement. All lives are important. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And then Brett, I already mentioned Brett's comment. Let me get down a little bit further. Oh, yeah. So Hendrik de Klerk asked how big the rugby club scene is in the U.S. in the moment. It's massive. It's massive. Club rugby has always been big in the U.S. It's been the strength of our game here. And from club rugby, without even having a professional league, we've had players who became professional rugby players. Like Chris Wiles, who goes on to play in Europe, and others like Todd Clever, who go on to play in Europe, just at a club rugby. I mean, that's it's always been a strength of this system. I've been to the USA club championships. Just amazing stuff. It's very popular. We have a huge number of registered rugby players, among the highest in the world. The game is going places, but it's always been here, and it's a misnomer. People think it's new. It's always been big in the U.S., but just not at professional level. So let's see what else. Then Suzanne Suzanne H. Said, "Well done and well said, Gareth." I don't know what she's referring to, but something you said a bit ago, so I just thought I'd mention it. And then Hank Adrianze said, "Well, it was the same with Curry Cup." This is from earlier. It failed when it was 14 teams. 6 teams is the best, and it's strength versus strength. I don't know if 6 is the best, but yeah, I agree. 14 was too much. What about you, Gareth?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there are differences. Or if you bring in more teams for Curry Cup, how can you inspire the people? I mean, there are teams like the Falcons who unfortunately are in financial strain, the Griquas who are now up and coming. But there's the Pumas and other teams that we know of but don't know of. How can we inspire, or how can we bring it back? Why not break the Springboks up a bit? Yes, you could obviously from the province, but now while we have COVID, to try and excite people, why not split the Springboks up and put them into three of them into each province, so that the likes of a team like the Pumas, South African Pumas, have an opportunity to play with the Springbok, have the opportunity to experience what it's like, and also for that Springbok to go back down to the roots, to realize what it's like to play for a team that you've left because of your achievements, and test up, not like IPL, but something similar, or the Big Bash in cricket, to adjust this Curry Cup to excite us. If they can do that by bringing in like the likes of Peter Steph Toy playing for the Pumas, or Sia Kolisi maybe moving from province, going into Eastern Province where he originally came from, just spice up the tournament a little bit, to do something different instead of growing it to 14 teams or 6 teams. Try and bring it to the fans for a difference or a change. I do agree, smaller teams within the tournament, but we could increase it to help grow the team within those smaller communities as well.
No, I absolutely agree. It's sorry, I was reading the chat over here, some comments here. This one kind of got my attention, so I got to read this and jump ahead. The Raptor Man says, "The almighty beard of Chris summoned me." That's right. Listen to Chris there. Yeah, listen to the 21st century Pete Retief or John Brown, the abolitionist here. That's what my beard looks like. Yeah, but good points, Gareth. Let me get back to some more of the comments here. Now, Hendo said that you can't support two SA rugby teams. Well, I would take exception to that comment because I do support more than one rugby team. Of course, it's always Stormers over everybody else, and then I'll kind of pull towards the Bulls after that, and then it just depends on who's playing where before I like it. I mean, I actually followed the Cheetahs for a while when Villers-Leroux was playing for them because he was my favorite player at the time, and then I followed the Sharks when the Duplessis brothers were there, Yanni and Bismarck. So it just depends. But I think you can support more than one team, and given how few people support SA Rugby, I think you have to support more than one team.
That's so true. I mean, I'm the same. I mean, I support my Sharks are my number one team through and through, and then my second team are the Kings. Yes, I know they're the bottom of the log and haven't done much, but they're my province, and I'm going to back them through and through. So, and then I have a soft spot for Western Province because I was born there. But you know what? I think you can. Obviously, you got your main team, but it doesn't hurt to have a bit of love or respect for another team. I know in South Africa, we generally have a love-hate, either love or hate the Sharks or love or hate the Bulls or whatever it may be, province. But there are definitely ways where we can have two teams. But obviously, don't just go for the winner. But that's why I have a top and a weaker team. If that makes sense.
No, I got you. It's always nice to have an underdog team that you're rooting for. Exactly, a team that's and when I was rooting for the Cheetahs, they would score like 60 points a game and lose every game because defense was alien to them.
Yeah, remember those days.
But they were exciting. They scored a lot. It was a lot of fun to watch all those tries. So Ascari West, and I love that that username. Ascari West says, "What an excellent guest. How's it, G-Man? Hi, Chris."
Hello.
It's nice when people have nice things to say and greet you in the chat there. Hendrik says, Paul Chris. Oh, yeah. Paul Kruger, I guess I look like now. Yeah, no, it's we got some great comments in the chat. Hey, folks, thanks for continuing to chat. Look at this. We got 46 viewing at the moment and 46 likes. Loving that ratio, ladies and gentlemen. That's pretty awesome. Thank you so much for that. All right, Gareth, let me move on to another topic here. So now we're talking about the potential, and we haven't got into it, but you and I have talked about offline, and I know it's been a topic for you, is that with the New Zealand Rugby Union, it became public that they were negotiating with a hedge fund in the U.S. For investment and to take Super Rugby in a different direction for them to pull the New Zealand clubs out of Super Rugby. And people are like, what? I don't think it should have come as a great surprise, though, because New Zealand, not just because of COVID-19, but because of the Crusaders win every year. I think even the Kiwis are bored with that, and they're also looking to make more money from rugby and make it more sustainable financially. And so I don't really fault them for looking to the U.S. to get investors, because I think when they went from 15 to 18 teams, that wasn't entirely a horrible plan, although it had other problems. But if they had picked a West Coast or a Hawaii side from the U.S. and made that part of it when they added Japan, I think that would have been a much smarter move financially for the league, with television contracts eventually and with money and getting U.S. interest in it. But they didn't do that. So with New Zealand looking that way, I don't have a major problem with it. But if, in fact, Super Rugby falls apart and the South African sides wind up going to Europe to play, because they're not going to create another domestic competition. You already have the Currie Cup, so that's not going to happen. But if they go to Europe to play, say one or two sides joins the Pro 14, mostly in a Celtic league, but not just a Celtic league, and so we add them in there, which is where the Cheetahs and the Kings are already at. Or maybe you see a side go over to like the Stormers or the Bulls, or maybe even the Sharks or Lions go over to Premiership Rugby, the English, the top league there. There's a different style of rugby in the Northern Hemisphere than there is in the Southern Hemisphere. I mean, the Southern Hemisphere guys will keep crashing the line, but in the North, they just love to kick the ball and put you to sleep all day long. They love to kick the ball. Do you think that over time, this will have an impact on the play of those from South Africa? Will their style of game change, or will it give them an advantage if they play in the North, or is it just not going to matter?
I think it's a bit of both. It depends the way you look at it. I mean, South Africa generally, we've done a lot of kicking games within, so I think we will adapt quite well in the North. It's obviously going to be different to adjust to the weather temperatures and all that stuff. And I know, talking to a few Kings here, that's been one of their biggest challenges to get used to is the cold over in like Glasgow, or where it gets quite cold. But overall, I think it's a positive move forward, and I think we will adapt. Yes, I agree. The kicking game does get a little bit boring. I like the running and intensity of the sport, but there's no saying we can't bring that over. I mean, if we bring our own game, the North might have to adapt to what we bring in, because it's maybe a more dominant force, or we will spice it up with a kicking game. I mean, if we've watched the Six Nation over the past 2 years, I found their rugby actually a lot more entertaining than what I have in the past. Whereas they've started running it a bit, or if they kick, it's not just ping pong back and forth, it's kick tactically,
Yeah.
or it's chip it in to still get the running form of game. And I think that's been when Ireland in 2018 dominated rugby, brought a different spice to it and changed the perspective of what we saw in the north of the old to what we are introducing. So I think adding the flair of South Africans to the north, whether it's Pro 14 or Premiership, I didn't even think of that, as you mentioned. It could just add a new flavor to the tournament that maybe their fans might be bored of, seeing Leinster or Saracens dominate the whole time, or something different. And I think that's been the excitement for me when I watch now the Pro 14, which I never really watched until the Kings and the Cheetahs joined. It has improved a lot as opposed to when it was the old school Heineken Cup. So I think it will add a good flair to the game in the north, and I think we will adapt to it and change it a bit.
No, the reason I asked that question is because I think it's germane, but also I think that the inclusion of the Cheetahs has definitely had a positive impact on Pro 14. I'm not convinced that the inclusion of the Kings was a good move, but I will say, but the Cheetahs have definitely had an impact on it. I think it's really been a positive impact. And I mentioned Premiership because I think the Premiership could take one South African club without upsetting the apple cart, and it would work. You don't want to expand the league too much, but I think that would be brilliant. But I don't know if the English are a bit, kind of snarky and snooty, so it's probably not going to happen. Whereas the Irish are much more affable and easy to get along with, and they're just looking for the best. So I think that's the Premiership. We'll see what happens there. But anyway, so a couple more comments here very quickly to get to. Fiona Timms mentioned that enough Castle, I'll say that South African style, enough Castle and you can do what you like. So, I suppose that's true, but I don't drink Castle, a Castle lager of any Castle, any sort. I'm a Windhoek lager only man in Southern Africa. I'm a bit of a beer snob. It's got to be by the Reinheitsgebot. It's the Reinheitsgebot or it's not beer. Devin Will said, I'll support any team against South Africa now, and that from a full-on ex-Book supporter. Well, that's unfortunate. Sorry to hear that, Devin, but I understand your sentiment and what you're upset about, but it's sad to see people say they're not going to support the Springboks anymore.
It is.
Yeah, and then Morton Christie says, I only support one team. And that's any. By the way, I should mention that Morton can be provocative at times, so let's just get this out in the open. Morton says, I only support one team, and that's any team playing against the Maffies. Sorry, I mean the Western Province Stormers. Foot sec, Morton, sec. But he was called on the carpet. Fiona came back and chastised him for that comment. So anyway. You gotta love it. All right, so let's shift a little bit here again. Let me give some comments. Give me your thoughts on this. These are my comments about the potential positives of playing and challenges of playing in the Northern Hemisphere. So I think from a travel standpoint, it's much better for South African squads because we're talking about a 12-hour flight from Joburg to Europe, and that's much easier. Yeah. And then the style of play I mentioned before, the money should be better than what they're making in Super Rugby. Yeah. And then is it the end of – now, this I didn't ask you, but okay, so New Zealand, unfortunately, has won 3 Webb Ellis trophies. Australia's won 2. I don't really care about the Oz, but it's the All Blacks I hate to see win. And then the Springboks have won 3. So that's 8 of 9 Rugby World Cup titles have been won by the Southern Hemisphere. The one exception, of course, being England in 2003, back in the days of Johnny Wilkerson. So if South African sides start playing regular competitions all the time with South African players, now I don't know if it's true, but I mean, there's a difference between South Africans going to France and going to the UK and playing on teams like Skalkberger playing for Saracens or watching Mornay Sten play in France or Brian Habana playing. That's a player coming to a club. But when you take a club from South Africa and it starts competing against teams in the North, is this going to change things? Will they be more familiar to the Northern Hemisphere players, and will it mean potentially the end of Southern Hemisphere dominance in Rugby World Cup at some point? Is that a possibility?
I think it will definitely assist them because I always go by the saying of if you want to be the best, you've got to play the best. And I think we've had a lot of focus and advantage by playing the All Blacks or the New Zealand teams. Yes, we get thumped by the Crusaders every now and then, but I think we've learned a lot on how to maybe reduce the margins from the 30s to the 40s to maybe 10s to 15s. and that we've improved by playing them. So I think by introducing the Sharks or Stormers or Bulls or whoever it may be into the Pro 14, it's definitely going to give them a boost and an understanding of how to play more like the South and introduce them to the type of rugby that we play. And I think it will definitely benefit because one thing's for sure, yes, South Africa won the Rugby World Cup, but there was a lot more dominance from Wales, from Ireland, and not quite Ireland, unfortunately, but in 2018 there was. Ireland, I predicted, could have been world champions in 2018 because they were so damn good with Sexton, with Conor Murray, with Tariq Fallon. They were brilliant. And they've improved a lot within the South and within the North of how they've played. So I think it's going to benefit, and I think it'll be a good thing for the North if we are introduced into it. So I think, yeah, it definitely increases the opportunity for them to win a World Cup or two.
Well, let me just do a little bit of housekeeping very quickly, Gareth. Thank you for that comment. So, folks, you're listening to Chris Wyatt Africa on the Indaba Africa channel here on YouTube on this lovely Sunday around the planet, the 2nd of August, 2020. And a special feature, my guest today is Gareth Mason, a massive, massive rugby supporter, and the guy who has the tagline, Walking Tall with the G-Man, which is pretty cool. I like that marketing. That's brilliant. We're talking about all things rugby today. We've covered South Africa, Super Rugby, Currie Cup, rugby in general. We've talked briefly about Major League Rugby here in the U.S., so we're going to cover some more topics here. But Gareth, let me shift just a little bit. You were mentioning earlier that you played sports. When I assume that was when you were younger. What sports did you go in for, and how was your experience?
My favorite sport was cricket. I have a massive passion and love for cricket. Rugby, I've always loved throughout my years, but because of being a dwarf, I could never play the sport. Because of obviously size difference. I played soccer as a youngster, but as my friends grew taller, I stayed the same, unfortunately. So I realized, okay, I can't continue football, but I did continue cricket. And I went into high school with an attitude of, I'm going to actually make the team. And my coach at the time said to me, sorry, Gareth, but because you're short, you will never play. And you won't get the opportunity because he's worried I'm going to get hurt or bowled in the head or whoever. I mean, just imagine Dale Steyn bowling to someone like me. But I didn't like that attitude and I wanted to prove him wrong. So I kept on going to every practice. They made me the scorer to try and be a part of the team, but it wasn't the same. I wanted to play the sport.
Yeah.
And I continued going to practice, etc. Anyway, grade 10, 2 years later, that coach left, which I was sad about because I wanted to prove him wrong. Mm-hmm. But it allowed another opportunity of a new coach in who didn't see size as a difference. And he chose me in the second week of his time coaching, and I never missed a game. And in my final year matric, I became first team captain.
Oh, congrats.
So
brilliant.
Through that, and that story is what's pretty much the tagline also of Walk It Tall. The sport just passion grew. But obviously, when varsity came, I played a bit of action cricket, and indoor sports, but I understood that playing it as a career wouldn't be for me. Yeah. So I created the channel to allow me to share my passion for the sport through that, because, getting a job isn't the easiest when you have the appearance that I might do. It's getting better. It is improving in quality and all that stuff. But with the beauty of internet, I could create my YouTube channel and my own sports show. And who knows, maybe a network one day would pick it up. But through that, sport has always been my passion. So I played rugby with mates, but never, unfortunately, as a school kid. But cricket was my number one sport and took me through the journey through junior school to high school, where it made the career. So it was awesome.
No, it's interesting you mentioned that. No, I never played rugby either. I grew up in high school in rural Appalachia. We were just happy to have electricity and paved roads. Those were new developments for us. So there was no rugby there. I'd heard of it, of course, and I was introduced to it when I went to university. I went to watch club rugby. But so I've only ever played it with mates, pickup games, that sort of thing, and always on the left wing. That's hence the number 11 on my jerseys. But yeah, so let me get a couple comments, and then let me shift it around a little bit and then see if you've got maybe some questions for me about what's this oak from America, following rugby for. So Stanley Robson says, great chat, Chris and Gareth. As a bulk supporter, I support the Springboks besides the politics of the day. Top brass have to consider the politics of the game, but as a supporter, I don't. I think that's a healthy approach there, Stanley. I mean, it's annoying for those of us who are fans that don't want politics in sports. but you appreciate and recognize that that the brass are involved in it for whatever reason, and it's not going to affect your viewership. So that's cool. Now, Hendrik de Klerk, who's a mate of yours, asked a question. I wasn't sure if he's having a crack or what, but let me try to read this because he's talking about Nas Bota. He said, and since he knows you, I don't think it's meant to trip us up, but I have to be careful sometimes because we'll throw things in, euphemisms in Afrikaans, which I'm not familiar with, and I say something I shouldn't say on the air. But Hendrik says, ask Gareth why Nas Bota broke, never dirty. Broke, never dirty. I don't know what that means. BROEK.
Well, why never? Maybe I'll ask Gareth why Nas Bota never got dirty because he kicked the ball too much. He never.
Maybe that's what he meant.
He never got tackled because he kept either. Well, as soon as he got the ball, he kicked it away. So that's why his clothes are always clean. I think maybe that's what he's referring to. Because I
think so.
Hendrik's a bull through and through, so it's probably that.
That's probably what it is. That's probably why he's having fun. And then Hendo said, Fiona, Nas can't tackle. Even Leon Schuster said that. Ouch. Ouch. Hey,
that's another thing, actually.
Yeah, that's true. But speaking of not being able to tackle, look, I'm kind of a big Mornay Sten fan, and he came under a lot of criticism, I think, by people, even though he should have been the all-time scoring leader for the Springboks, but he's not. He's number 2, but because he hasn't played much in the last few years. But he was pretty impressive. He was accurate. He could hit most things, even from distance. But honestly, I'll be honest. When he first came up to the box, he could not tackle. It's almost like he stepped aside when people came his way. But I would say that his game changed over years, and maybe it was because he was in France. But he became much better at defense and was no longer a liability in defense. And I'm actually kind of happy to see him come back and play with the Bulls. It kind of make me interested in the Bulls. That plus the fact that they've brought so many people in has really got me thinking about the Bulls now.
Yeah, the Bulls are going to be a force to be reckoned with these days. I'm very nervous of them as a Sharp supporter. I think Jake White's doing some big things there, so watch out.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. No, I think hiring Jake White for the Bulls to revamp that team was a brilliant move. You mentioned, we were talking about Nas Bota. If we have time, maybe we'll get to the Ashwin Willemse nonsense that happened. But not at the moment. I'm going to give you a chance to ask me some questions. But the Ashwin Willemse thing that happened, the outcome of that is I haven't heard from Ashwin Willemse since that happened. He's just disappeared. And I used to be able to watch him, comment on rugby all the time, which is unfortunate. But we'll get to that in a little bit. All right. So Gareth, do you have any questions for me? I would turn this around a little bit, give you a chance to ask me some questions.
What inspired the passion of the Springboks in the 1980s, you said?
Yeah, 1980s.
I'm very interested to hear.
Okay.
As an American chap, how did rugby trigger you to become a fan of South Africa? I know you're big on Africa and you traveled around, but where did the Springboks and that come in? Because that fascinated me.
Well, now, and as it did apparently Joel Stransky. So Gareth, you're in good company with that. So, okay, let me explain. All right, so as I said, there's a super chat from Malcolm Stark. Malcolm says, "Bulls eat shark bill tongue for breakfast." Ouch, ouch. All right, let's start a super chat.
Talking a lot of bullshit.
Well, and that's okay. You can talk all the BS they want. People want to support the channel. Come on, another super chat. Come on, Stormers. No, just kidding. No, but seriously. Yeah. So I went to I was at a Friday afternoon leadership laboratory for ROTC. That's the military training courses you take at university. And one of the upperclassmen, this black guy, said to me, "Hey, you coming to the game tonight?" It was a Friday. I'm like, you got to understand that most people at university aren't in class on Friday, so this is a miserable existence. I'm not out, eating pizza and drinking beer and chilling for the weekend. So I'm in class, and he's like, "You gonna come to the game tonight?" I'm like, "Dude, the game's tomorrow." We didn't say "dude" in 1982, but you get the point. Dude, the game. Well, actually, I think we did because Fast Times at Ridgemont High was already out. Dude, that was my pizza. Anyway, no, but it's like, dude, the game's tomorrow. He goes, "No, not football. I'm talking about rugby." I'm like, I've heard of rugby, but I've never played. He goes, "No, don't worry, playing. Just come down, watch the game. You'll have a lot of fun. You'll meet people. It'll be a blast." Yeah. So I went down to the band practice fields where the band would rehearse and stuff down by the river. And there's no stands. You're just standing on the side in touch. And I'm watching this game going. I'm like, it's not Australian rules football. It's not football. It's interesting. I have no idea why they blew the whistle, but this is kind of cool. And I kind of got interested, and that was 1982. Well, of course, there's no television. The U.S. didn't even have a national side in 1982. That wasn't until 84 that we got a national side. There was no HSBC 7 series back then. None of this stuff was around. So it was just national teams and tests for the most part. And we didn't have that in the U.S., so I could never watch it. But I loved the game, and I said, this is something I want to follow. And I was studying history. I'm a historian. And so I decided, let me see which country I can follow since we don't have a team here in the U.S. And I looked around. And, of course, remember, there's no Google. There's no mobile phones or any of that stuff. So, I mean, when I say research, I'm going to a library and looking at magazines and periodicals and books and things. And what I discovered quickly is that that New Zealand, South Africa, and Australia, not so much Australia, but England and Ireland particularly had this long established rugby tradition. And since I already had an interest in Southern Africa and South Africa in particular, I said, okay, I'm going to follow Springboks because they're one of the best teams historically. And then, of course, as soon as I mentioned that, talk to people, what are you, a racist? Oh, God, no, I'm not a racist. Stop it. Anyway, but so that was where the interest for the Springboks came. Of course, I never actually got to see a Springboks game for, gosh, nearly 20 years after, not quite 20 years, but, about 15 years after that. That's how it grew out of, and I've never given up the Springboks. Even when they were abysmal under under Alistair Coetzee. I was crying all the time, but I never gave up on them.
We all were.
Yeah, it's really sad. And I didn't like the pick anyway. Nothing against Alistair. He's a great oak, but I was angry at him with Western Province and the Stormers because, in my view, in his tenure, Province should have won 5 Currie Cups and they should have won 2 Super Rugby Championships. Instead, we got 3 Currie Cups, I think, and no Super Rugby Championships.
Yeah, my dad's in agreement there.
Because he may be a nice guy, but he lacks the heart of a lion when it comes time to pounce and win. It's like watching the Tony Dungy and the Indianapolis Colts. They won a Super Bowl in spite of Tony Dungy. He's a great guy, but he never pounced. They would get ahead by 3 touchdowns, and they sit back and relax, and a team would come back and beat them. Whereas the New England Patriots, despite the fact that I detest New England Patriots, they would play every team. They try to run the score up to 1,000-0 just because they're arrogant, and they never lost because of that. So Western Province and the Stormers should have won and done much better in that time frame than they did. And you don't often get that collection of talent in one place for a long period of time. And if you don't win championships, then you're not going to get them. So that's my thoughts on that.
And then with regards to, you've traveled a lot around and stayed a lot in Africa. If I'm not mistaken, you haven't lived in South Africa.
No, I've never lived in South Africa. I've been there many times. I lived in Botswana.
Why is that out of interest? When you've lived around?
Why have I lived around, or why have I not lived in South Africa?
Yeah, what made you not choose South Africa to stay in for a short period of time or something?
Oh, it's not a choice. I haven't been free since 1983. I've been in servitude.
Yes.
Active military from 1983 with a there was a 2-year break where I went back to university to complete university 87, 89, but I was in the National Guard then. So I have not been able to live where I want to live since 1983 until October of 2019, and I was already living in Pennsylvania. So so it's not a choice not living in South Africa. In fact, one of my career goals was to be there. So when I was enlisted, I went to the education center in Germany in a town called Bad Kreuznach where I was stationed. And I was sitting there waiting to see the guidance counselor to sign up for university classes at night. The Army paid part of the tuition so I could go to school and work on my degree. And while I was sitting there was this little pamphlet on the table, and I picked it up, and I'm like, the Army Foreign Area Officer Program. This is fascinating. Travel the world, be an attaché, work in embassies. This is cool. That's what I want to do when I grow up. And so I decided right then and there in 1984 when I was a private that I wanted to be a regular Army officer, become a military intelligence officer. Because you're not a foreign area officer your entire career. That's once you become a more senior officer. When it was time to become a foreign area officer for sub-Saharan Africa, make full colonel, and that's actually in my education record, still written down where I wrote that colonel, and be the defense attaché in South Africa. All of that came true except the defense attaché in South Africa, and the reason that didn't come true is that assignments have a lot to do with availability. So when I was promoted to full colonel, that position had been filled and I couldn't get it. And then the next time it was coming available, I had just moved. And while they could have moved me, what happened is the U.S. Africa Command turned the attaché role from the Army over to the U.S. Navy. And so I couldn't fill it as an Army officer. So I never got to fulfill that goal. But but I've been in South Africa many times. When I lived in Gaborone, I went down there frequently, lots of time in Rustenburg, Pretoria. Pretoria is my favorite part of South Africa. I mean, to hang out.
I love Pretoria too,
to hang out and live in. People are like, are you crazy? No, because I can go there. I can speak English. I can speak Afrikaans. I can speak Setswana. All of that works really well. The people around there, most of them that I meet have their heads screwed on straight. And while you have a lot of challenges in South Africa, they seem less accentuated to me in Pretoria. They're not non-existent, but they're less accentuated. And I love the topography of the area. The Mahalisburg, just to the west of there, is beautiful. Where Pretoria sits, in that valley is pretty cool. I just like the area, and I like the weather and everything. So I like the high veld, so it's kind of cool. And for me, when I was in Gaborone, it's a 3-hour drive, and then Joburg's a 4.5 hour drive, depending on traffic. So yeah, that's the area I like that. So, but I've been all over South Africa with the exception of the Northern Cape, the Eastern Cape, and then parts of Mpumalanga, of course. And I've never been to Kruger, but I have been to Nelspruit out that way. So.
Okay, fascinating. That's interesting.
Yeah. So.
And then last one, sorry. NFL. Who do you support?
Nobody.
Nobody. Okay.
No. I was a massive American football supporter my entire life. I'm a Colts supporter, Indianapolis Colts. They were originally the Baltimore Colts.
Okay, cool.
Well, I'm from Baltimore originally. Of course, Johnny Unitas was the greatest quarterback in the history of the NFL. Yes, I'm biased, but that's a fact. Anyway, doesn't have the best stats, but the guy changed the game. The game we see today is a consequence of Johnny Unitas making it in the NFL, the West Coast offense, the passing aspects of it. But what happened is we moved to Pennsylvania when I was a kid, to Scranton, Pennsylvania, and that's within aerial distance of New York City for the broadcast, for the rabbit ears on your televisions, So
Yes.
yeah, so we were watching television. It was 1975, and my stepfather and I turned on the TV to watch it. And the Colts were playing the Jets that weekend from New York, and that's why we got the broadcast. And he said, "Well, who are you going to root for?" I said, "Well, I'm from Baltimore, so I'm a Colts fan." And I don't know about the Colts. I knew about Johnny Unitas, but never really followed it much as a kid until this day. And that day, the Colts had started the season 1 win and 4 losses. Not a good start. And so they'd had a couple bad seasons in a row after the end of the Johnny Unitas era. And so I said, I'm a Colts fan. They won that game. They won 9 consecutive games, went to the playoffs for the first time in like 4 years, and I was sold on the Colts. They had 3 great seasons, 75, 76, and 77. Then they went in the doldrums again. In the 1980s, the team slipped out of town in the middle of the night, went to Indianapolis, which Baltimore fans never forgave them for. But my take on it was always this. If my family can be away from Baltimore, so can the Colts. I can still be a Colts fan, and I remain a Colts fan forever. When the kneeling with Kaepernick started and the distortions and lies about what America is and what it isn't, I was offended by that. But mostly I was offended because the National Football League has a 24-hour-a-day, 7 days a week cable network called the NFL Network. And if they're concerned about social injustice or systemic racism, whatever it is they claim is going on, they have a television network and they can put these issues on there 24 hours a day. They don't have to pay anybody for it. And they can just put it on their channel. They can have commentators. They can bring in professional journalists and say, hey, okay, what are the issues? Let's talk about it. Here's the history. But they don't do that because they don't care about it. It's virtue signaling. It's all nonsense. And then we see kids in Idaho in all white schools, because there's no black folks living up there, taking a knee before the game for things they don't even understand and distorting the history about the United States and distorting. Now, most of these people doing this didn't grow up with genuine racism in this country. Now, I'm not saying there aren't racists. There are racists everywhere, sadly. But fortunately, they're a very small percentage of every population group, thank God. But I grew up with court-ordered busing, because of desegregation in schools and things like that. I grew up in Maryland when I was a kid, when everybody, white and black, the N-word came out of their mouth in almost every sentence. And not in a malicious way most of the time. That's just how people talked. It sounds very ignorant these days to hear people use those words, but that was very, very common back then. And so it's a very different era. And to hear people say the things they say, and having lived all over the world and having seen true poverty and having seen true discrimination. Look, if you live in Liberia, it's illegal to own land unless you're a black African. It's in the Constitution. So there's Lebanese that lived in Liberia for 100 years, 4th generation. It's illegal for them to buy land, even though they're Liberian citizens. Now that's racism. So anyway, it's just the NFL. I decided to give them a chance again this year. They had the draft earlier this year. I followed the draft online. The Colts did very well in the draft. They drafted some really talented college football players and looked like they were going to come back and have a really great season this year. But now they've started their nonsense all over again. And they've taken it to an nth degree, apologizing for not recognizing this. The problem I have with it is, not to get too far into politics, but this isn't about equality and systemic racism and injustice. This is about supremacy of one group over another. And I detest that by any group. The KKK calls for supremacy. I'm against it. Black Lives Matter calls for supremacy. I'm against it. They don't say they're calling for it, but when they expect people to kneel in fealty before them, the only person you kneel before is your creator, or someone you owe fealty to. I don't owe fealty to anyone, including the United States. I don't kneel for the United States. You only kneel in prayer. So I just, there's lots more to it than that, but not to get into it. So that's NFL. To answer your question directly, I'm a Colts fan, but I'm unlikely to watch football this year.
Okay.
Any others?
Yeah, I think we sold it. The South African one and the Springboks fascinated me, especially when you did a SEER video, because that's what introduced me to you big time. And I always wanted to know, because I think when Hendrik made a comment to me earlier in the week saying that you mentioned me, and I said, when he said your name, I said, the American chap talking about SEER, and then he's like, yeah. So I said, I'm aware of him. But no, it's fascinating.
That video is actually, you and I were talking offline. That video, I was just checking it really quick, is, it's like a little shameless self-promotion here. It's my channel, so I'm going to do this. But,
Go for it.
But yeah, so let me put that link back up. That's, I called it Sia Khaleesi and cutting up your Springbok jersey. And I didn't threaten to cut up my Springbok jersey. I didn't cut up my Springbok jersey. The whole point of the video was that I disagree with people who are cutting up their Springbok jerseys. Now, I used that video as an opportunity to air my differences with what Sia said, and I didn't misquote him. I actually pulled up a piece of paper, verbatim quotes of what he said,
Yeah,
and made my points about how I disagree with what he was saying. People always want to play, and I'm not saying Sia is doing this, but people always want to play the victim. What was me? What about mine? What about mine? Well, when you join something that's different than you, you shouldn't expect that they should have to accommodate you and change. If people want to do that, they choose to do it, that's cool. We do that all the time. So, for instance, when I was in Tunisia, I was a student at the L'École d'État Major, which is the staff college here. It's taught in French, 9 months long, about 8 months longer than it should have been. So I was there. I didn't expect them to speak in English. I had to take the course in French. It's the culture there. That's what they speak in. Almost everyone in my class, except for the Italian and the Spaniard and a couple others, were all Muslims. So when the oh gosh, now I'm drawing a blank here. Senior moment. What's the fast every year? Gosh bless it, I'm drawing a blank there.
The Eid.
No, not the Eid. That's when they slaughter goats. Oh gosh. Anyway, Ramadan. Thank you.
Ramadan.
Ramadan. So when Ramadan came along that year, it coincided with the month of December in 2000, and so as a spirit of solidarity, rather than expecting them to change or celebrate Christmas with me because none of them are Christians, because I joined a larger culture that was beyond mine, I practiced fasting during Ramadan. Now, it was funny because during Ramadan, I was in class all the time, and I'm tall and skinny, and I have a metabolism like a hummingbird, so I would eat M&Ms and drink Cokes all day long in class and eat things all the time. And so when Ramadan came, I stopped that. And that was a bit of a sacrifice. I mean, it's not, don't get me wrong. It wasn't like I marched 40 miles through the snow with a pack on my back. But giving that up, it was actually a sacrifice for it. So with Ramadan, and it's tougher in Tunisia because it's above the equator towards the northern hemisphere, so you get longer days. It's not like being on the other end. If you're in Norway, you don't have to worry about it because the nights are short. But anyway, so what happened was I would go to class and I wouldn't eat or drink anything, just like my Muslim classmates. And then one day, one of the guys who was a friend of mine says, "Yeah, so no, Wyatt, he's always eating." And the guy's, "No, he's our brother. He's our brother. Wyatt's our brother. He's adhering to the Ramadan." And the guy's like, "No, you're not." I said, "Yeah, I am." "Oh yeah, but when you go home, you eat." I said, "No, not till the sun goes down." And my point is that was their culture. I was in their culture. It was not a great sacrifice for me to change it. It is not a major sacrifice for Sia Khaleesi to learn Afrikaans. If I had a chance to play for the Springboks, I would learn Afrikaans just for that reason. So that's kind of where that came from. So it kind of irritating when people do that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's such a stronger. It's a powerful point you mentioned, and I think I said it to you yesterday on that WhatsApp call, was that his media manager could have taken this approach to make such a success story, and taken it into account of calling out the ones who are at fault, the government. How can we get equality better? Acknowledging the other murders that are going on in this country, and bringing that power that he brought at the 2019 Rugby World Cup final. That speech that he did there inspired a lot of people. And if he just had a bit more thought in, he could have said something there that could have gone viral and changed a lot of people's lives and perspective in bringing everyone together, which unfortunately it seems to have done. So all that history, that love and respect, and that awesome atmosphere that we were led to believe was so great, people are now questioning it, which is quite sad. So I just feel he could have done it in a different way to benefit everyone.
Well, that's exactly my point, and that was part of the reason for making the video. It wasn't about dissing Sia Khaleesi, because I'm a Province fan. I'm a big fan of Khaleesi, although I think he's lost a step. But we all lose a step with age and injuries, so I don't criticize him. I think he was the right fit for this team, even though he wasn't the best number 6 available. But I did agree with his selection. But my point was that the things that Sia has been telling us for 18 months about how wonderful the team is, what a great coach Rossi is, how everybody's included, how everybody's views are part of it, and how we're a team, we're not individuals. And he's been telling us about kumbaya and harmony and racial harmony for 18 months. And then he talks about this, and okay, what are we to believe now? The context is not there. And all it did was cause discord, and I'm very disappointed in Sia Khaleesi. I'm not angry at him. I'm not, and of course you get people who take the coffee table analysis. Well, his wife is white, his kids are mixed race, so what about how do they feel? Let's keep that out of the conversation. Let's talk about the fact. I think what you just said, Gareth, is that it's unfortunate that the proper context wasn't put in there. If he made a video and say that, let me just make a what if. Here's a what if, a counterfactual. Let's say that if what Sia did was the following. he made a video and he said, listen, I understand where people are coming from. You're talking about discrimination or challenges in society. For me personally, when I first got into rugby, it was challenging because I didn't speak Afrikaans, and I went from this place to another school where I had to learn Afrikaans, which he apparently did very well. His marks were quite good, but I learned Afrikaans, and in rugby, people didn't do the lineouts in English or Kosa. They did it in Afrikaans, so I had to learn Afrikaans. That was a challenge for me. And you know, if he did it in that context, that would have been different. But instead, he played the victim. That's the wording here. Well, I was forced to learn Afrikaans. How come it's not in Kosa? Well, how come it's not in Venda or Basutu or San, or you know, why isn't that? Well, there's a tactical advantage for the Springboks doing Afrikaans. The only other country that uses Afrikaans for its lineouts is Namibia, and they never play them except in the World Cup, so they're going to roll over them anyway. So I mean, people sit there and hear the lineout in Afrikaans, they have no idea where the ball is going, but in English we know exactly where the ball is going.
And I think that's such a powerful point. And even in life in general, not just sport, you know, you go to a new job, you're not quite sure on what the environment's going to be. You're going to be nervous. You're going to be worried. You're not going to be sure of if you're going to make the right decision, because you have to learn the way they work, adjust. And you're going from another company to another. Life in general. You know, me, even in sport, I was told I couldn't, but I wanted to prove them wrong.
Yep.
He could have done a different approach to inspire and encourage people rather than, like you say, play the victim, which he did. And with what he's achieved in the past year, 2 years, 3 years, his whole career, he could have made it so much more important to silence the wrong reasons of the movement, like the violent protesting and all that stuff, and create a positive way. He did it actually not when we were in the lockdown, having a plea to people to stay home, follow the rules, and it went viral.
Yeah.
Because it was a big figure like Sia telling the guys, telling everyone, no matter what race, he was telling everyone stay home, and he spoke in the language as well as English, and he could have done it a lot better. That could have really taken the world by storm. And unfortunately, he didn't do that. And I think that also he should have thought before maybe speaking.
Well, and I think that you're spot on, Gareth. For celebrities, for sports icons, social media is a dangerous thing. It's a tool at their disposal, which can make them quite popular and have great influence on people. But it's also something that usually, now this is a rule I would use if I was a celebrity. I'm not a celebrity, but if I was a celebrity, I would use the same rule I used when I was at work, and I would send emails. When you're angry, it's okay to write out the email. Save the draft. Come back later when you've calmed down. You're like, oh, thank God.
Yes.
Thank God I didn't send that. And I think that would have been a good advice on this video for Sia Khaleesi. And if he maybe consulted with a marketing person, they'd have been like, okay, Sia, look, you're just going to piss people off, man. Maybe whatever your feelings are, because I'm not going to make this excuse for Sia Khaleesi, but I suspect that there's one of two things going on here. There's a lot of cynicism that he did this because he signed with Jay-Z's company, which spends a lot of money to Black Lives Matter, and it's just he's sold out. That might be the case. If that's the case, that's one thing. But the other thing here is that that's a true statement. He did sign with that company, so maybe he's sold out, and that's unfortunate.
I was aware of that, but I didn't think of that part. That's interesting.
That's a very real possibility. If he is, then that's really shameful. But I don't know that that's the case. I'm not going to accuse him of that without any more evidence.
Sure.
But it certainly is something that hangs out there like a big matzo ball. But the other piece of this is that so I'm not going to try to cover him and say he was mistaken. But whatever message he was trying to get out there, it hasn't gotten out. People are upset on both sides wherever they come down. And if you're going to support something like Black Lives Matter, you better become fully informed on what it is. Go read their platform, their website, and people who come out and support Black Lives Matter have never read that. If they did, they would be appalled. I mean, Sia, I don't know if he's a Christian. I'm not a particularly devout Christian, but if he's a Christian, if he read their views on Christianity, he would be opposed to them on that basis alone. Or the fact that they call for illegitimacy and the end of the nuclear family. That ought to appall people. I can't believe that Sia Khaleesi, who's a man who's married and who has children, would think that it's okay to have illegitimate children. So I don't think he really knew what he's talking about, and he should have done more research or had a publicity guy talk to him before he did that, because the message he's trying to get across is very confused now. Anyway, but that happens a lot in sports messages. Let me catch it real quick with a couple super chats before we get out of here. We had a few super chats this last few minutes. I won't want to miss those. Malcolm did his a little bit earlier, and then I've had a few here from the Flying Boar. Flying Boar had a $5 super chat, said, just like the NBA, I'm not watching that sport anymore because it's too much kneeling. I'm not watching the NBA because it's boring, Flying Boar. Everybody plays the same way. Everybody looks the same. There's no difference. There's no defense. And since Jordan retired, I've not been an NBA fan. That's why I'm not watching it. Then the Flying Boar gave another one. Says, Khaleesi was born in 1991. Apartheid ended in 1990. Well, technically it ended in 1994, technically, with the new dispensation and the all-democratic elections. But I get your sentiment there, Flying Boar. Khaleesi should blame all the struggles in ANC because they've been in charge for 26 years. Well, the ANC certainly bears a lot of responsibility for what's been happening. I won't disagree with that. Anna Marie Forster said, now, I know it's off topic, but less than 2 hours, Enter the Dragon. She's talking about the return of Bob and Doug from International Space Station, which we're going to cover a little bit later. So that's what she brought up. Let me see. Then there was somebody, Lawrence 007 said, Morne Sten... Kayan pain in sa brain. He's got pain in his head. My Afrikaans pronunciation is terrible there. And then Jansa said that, Chris, you sound just like some of our ex-Springbok supporters. I'm not sure what that was in response to, but yeah. Anyway, do you mind if we spend a minute, or you got to take off and talk about Ash Willem, say, if you want, or we can leave that for another time?
No, we can go for it.
Okay, so I saw this and I was appalled. But now we didn't see what happened off camera, and I don't know if anyone ever got the footage because they keep filming when it's off camera. But I saw the broadcast of it, and I saw Ronaldo Host video on this. I don't know if you did a video about it, but I didn't see one.
I did.
Okay, I wasn't watching your channel then, so I didn't see it. But I saw this and this is how it came off to me. So you tell me your view on this, but this is how this whole thing came off to me. Whatever was said behind the screen, it seemed to me that maybe Ash thought that Nas and who else was on this stream with him, the other coach?
Nick Mallet,
thanks. Nick Mallet and Ash were that Nas and Nick Mallet were kind of teaming up and bullying him for something that they were joking about, and he took it the wrong way and he took offense to it. Okay, I got that. People do. That happens all the time. But then they came back on air, and rather than being professional, they weren't talking about that, and he just kept dragging it on rather than letting it go. When you're on air, you got to let that stuff go, and discuss it behind the scenes. And he just went off, and everyone in air just saw him looking like an ass and didn't hear what happened before that. There may have been a legitimate reason why he was upset, but that's not how it came across. And then people demanded that they be fired for something that nobody even saw. We never even heard that. That's ludicrous. And then, of course, they do an investigation, and there's nothing to it. At least that's what they say in the investigation. I think that what happened probably is, now I don't know, but from my perspective, that Ash felt he was being bullied because this comment about quota players, whoever brought it up, and that's a very sensitive topic, and I get it. But listen, Ashton Williams, in my view, earned his place on the Springboks, and he played well on the field. So he has no reason to have this inferiority complex, but it's a tag that hangs around, and I understand it. So am I missing something, or is that kind of close to where it was at?
No, I think you're 100% spot on. And to this day, not many people are actually aware of the full-on story. It's just gone quiet. Ashwin came up in the news about 2 weeks ago when he was part of the 49 to 50 people who are on Lungi Ngiri's side of the whole BLM movement, with taking the knee and all that stuff. And I know he came in because of the quote. That's the first time I've heard about Ashwin since this whole drama story.
Yeah.
And I think you're spot on. I think it's they mentioned something, he took offense, and he took it on air and just decided, well, let me make a big thing about it. But he hasn't. I know he's been on certain media hosts and talking as if like he was bullied the whole time. But I mean, it's sad because the three of them had a good relationship and very entertaining and interesting to listen to. I mean, it just ruined a relationship. But yeah, there's a lot of talk. I know there was a few guys who kind of went in sort of support, but then they backed away very quickly. So I think there's so much more to the story that no one's leaking out. It's a bit like Evan Etzebeth. People were accusing him, but they don't know the story. There's no full-on proof. And now SA Rugby announced today that it's been like kind of they're dropping those charge case. So I think there's no facts to whether Nick and Nas were bullying him or going through it, and he's got nothing to prove. Therefore, it's now silenced. And yeah, it's a tough one.
I think that
But
the two really sad parts about that, Gareth, from my standpoint, are number one is that it ruined a relationship. I don't know
yeah,
how
yeah,
sound the relationship was, but on air, they look. I don't think Ash was the best commentator, but I enjoyed listening
mm-mm,
to him. And
yeah,
I also don't think Nas is the best commentator. To be
I
honest, I,
agree.
I think Nick Mallett's far better, but that's just me. But anyway, but nonetheless, that team on there did a pretty good job. And I enjoyed Ash on there, even though sometimes I'm like, okay, that's not really what I saw happen. But anyway, but I thought he was a good
Yeah,
commentator from that standpoint. I enjoyed seeing him on there. So I think it's ruined a professional relationship, which is unfortunate ruin. Listen, I've been with people who've said nasty things about me in a place where it was highly inappropriate, whether they agree with what I said or not. They were just angry about something, and oftentimes not at me, and they took it out on me. But I'm a professional. I walked away, and I've had people who work for me who I dislike, but they were good at their job, and I've treated them professional. I've recommended people for promotions and decorations that they earn, even though I didn't like them. And so, to me,
mm,
Ash
mm.
Ash Ash acted like an impetulant child there, and that kind of irritated me. Even if he had been, even if they'd said the K word off air, something which they didn't do, but if they'd said something like that, you got to turn your face back on, man, because you're back on television. And anyway, so it's unfortunate that professional relationship was ruined. But what's more unfortunate for me is listening to the EFF, the ANC, and people in South Africa, the race merchants, starting their racism, calling Nas and Nick Mallett racist, and then Ash and other people, well, you're just retreads from the apartheid era. Well, it's not Nas Bota's fault that he grew up in the rugby era when it was apartheid, and it's also not Ash and Willemse's fault that he grew up in an era when that just ended and he got to play. And some people said, "Oh, you're a quota player." That's not his fault either. That's just the
Yeah,
circumstances at the time.
spot
So
on.
so don't blame Nas Bota for that. And Ash, don't feel inferior because of that. You earned your spot on the team. Listen, Gio Applin didn't get much time, and I love Gio Applin. He never
I
complained.
agree.
He never complained about how little Springboks time he got. I think he should have gotten more Springboks time. He
I
was brilliant.
100%.
Yeah, and I love Gio Applin, but he's straightforward. I mean, I've never heard him say anything stupid. So I got another super chat here I got to get here from the Flying Boy. He says, Kalishi should be suspended for what he did. He disrespected Springboks tradition. Flying Boy, I don't know if I agree with he should be suspended, but I think that
Yeah,
he
I
probably
agree.
should clarify what he said, unless he really does,
Yeah,
unless he does support Black Lives Matter, then he should just let it die. But if that's not what he meant, he should clarify it. I think that's more important.
I agree. I don't think he should be suspended. He's talking these days. And also, yeah, I just think more should have been done. He could have seen a marketing team or his team manager
Mm-hmm.
to assist him in getting the wording right or the message. Because the message is important for him to share, but he needs to set it in a way that doesn't cause from about a year ago, where the country was in happiness and excitement,
Yeah.
to now when people are doing things like burning or cutting up their jerseys. So yeah, it's just an understanding of communication of the topic.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. So it's along with the whole thing with people using race and the race merchants, which is something we've had going on states here for a long time. But two other issues come to mind there. The one is of course you just mentioned Eben Etzebeth and what happened just before the World Cup and how people assume that he's a racist. I'm like, okay, the guy's been playing on teams, hugging black guys, hanging out in locker rooms with them, going to dinners with them, been friends with them. Not a single comment
Best
ever
friends
been.
with the captain.
Exactly. They're best friends. They both play in the Stormers. No one's ever said anything about this guy being racist. And now you're claiming this bar incident where some other guy incident, you don't even know the facts. So that bothered me. And then the same thing like a few years ago when that ass did the video that South African says, "Oh, look at this racist here. Look at this racist Jesse Creel. He won't stand next to the black boy." When they were lining up, knowing nothing about rugby and how traditionally the Springboks line up by position number and they were out of position. That nonsense is just so disgusting.
It is. It's sad. The negative media just keep focusing on all that stuff. It was the same thing when the Springboks came back. I mean, the EFF spokesperson, Glossy, said, we aren't stronger together. They're not uniting a nation. It's making it worse. And I think he stated it when Sia was actually in Parliament and they caused chaos. And it just leaves such a sour taste. If people could just get common sense and work together, and try and benefit each person, each community, each religion, each race, each disability, each gender, we would create such a better. It's not that hard. I mean, obviously it's hard, but if you create an environment that's positive and teach the youth the right way, it's just going to pass on that positive. They're only negative because they're learning from the parents or the friends or the history.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said earlier, the past is the past. We can't change it. Focus on the future.
No, absolutely. I'm with you on that. So it's just frustrating when people do that. I just call those people race merchants, and they look for slights or something to be aggrieved about in everything that happens, rather than looking for what's really happening.
Yeah.
And I've had this conversation on my channel, explaining to people there's a difference between bigotry and racism. And in America, people conflate the two, and they say things that are actually bigoted. They call it racist. It's not racist. A racist is someone advocates one group better than another. But anyway, a couple things from the comments here really quickly. And then I want to ask you about Rugby World Cup expansion, if you don't mind talking about that. I wrote an article about that a couple of years ago. Get your thoughts on that.
Sure.
Okay, so and then we'll wrap it up. I can't stay here all day. You've got things to do. But let's see. Well, Tian said that Ashwin wasn't prepared, was a poor commentator, and got called out for it. I think I kind of touched on it. I think he's the best commentator, but I enjoyed him, and so I miss him. I actually wish he was still there, and it's a shame it happened. And then Tintin, or Ten, as we say in French, said, Gareth, I'll disagree with you on transformation. It's not just implemented at grassroots. It goes up much further, thereby denying opportunities to talented kids. Seen it firsthand. Okay. Yeah, I didn't. I'm not so. That's a fair comment, I think. And then Louis ZA said, Chris, can you please ask Gareth my question posted above about our beloved Shark Tank, please? And then also about, are the Sharkettes still there? Louis, your question doesn't show up in my stream. I don't know where it went. So can you re-ask the question, or is it just about the Sharkettes? I don't. So he asked a question about the Shark Tank and the Sharkettes. Were they eliminated from the arena or something, or what's the deal?
Oh, I'm not too sure about that one.
Right.
Maybe just elaborate a bit more. And
then Louis, ask your question again, because it's not showing up in my chat. You said above, and I went way back, half an hour. I didn't find the comments, so my apologies for that. Anne-Marie Forster says, I must admit I stopped watching rugby when all the rules changed so much. Lifting and line-outs, players on the field, it looked like they were wearing G-strings. Well, listen, the rule changes do get a little confusing. The scrum, the way the scrum rules are changing, and how you make a mistake in the scrum can be very, very confusing for fans. I mean, I get where she's coming from on that. What about you? What are your thoughts? Are there too many rule changes?
I think they do chop and change a little bit, and it confuses the game. Like the scrum, within the stop, touch, pause, engage, set, it just changes, and I think it confuses everyone, because just when you get the hang of it, something changes. But there's a point to that statement.
Well, the Flying Board just gave another super chat. So he said Khaleesi should talk to the family of farmers who are murdered before he talks about BLM. Yeah, that's a very apropos and sensitive topic on rural murders. I did a video on that recently too. So let's shift really quick here, Gareth, and then we'll kind of wrap up, I think. So I did an article about 2 years ago in which because this was when Augustin Pichot, the Argentinian player who was with World Rugby, a senior official there, who's now left. And I'm not sad about that, but he was calling for expansion of Rugby World Cup, adding more nations, potentially going from 20 teams to 24. And I said, well, like a lot of rugby fans, I'd love to see more countries in the World Cup. I mean, now we've seen FIFA, although it's a criminal enterprise, but the FIFA has successfully expanded its field over the decades, and it's a huge field with like 48 teams now, I think, that get to the World Cup. So, but they've done it well, actually. They've done a lot of things wrong, but they do that well. I'm not a fan of soccer, but I will say they've done it well. But Rugby World Cup, I'm not opposed to the concept of expansion, but the problems I have with it are the following, and this is just a few of them from the article that I wrote, which was on Don Stanford's Rugby Corner, but he only has videos now, so it's come off there. Anyway, the first problem I have is that how can you talk about expanding and getting more teams when the second tier and third tier nations, in other words, the minnows, the only time they ever play any top flight rugby talent is in the World Cup. So the U.S. has not played England in living memory outside the World Cup. They've not played South Africa in living memory outside the World Cup. It's like 20 years ago, I think they played. They have not played any of these teams. The only team they played in recent memory that's a top-tier team is Argentina through the America's Rugby Championship, and that's not even their top players. That's their second squad. Or Scotland, who sent its youth, and they got beat by the U.S. in Houston. Surprise, Scotland, we won. But it's not just the U.S.; it's other countries. It's like for a while, it's even Argentina. They're not playing those test matches against teams, but now that they're in the Rugby Championship, it helps them. But Japan doesn't get those chances. Romania doesn't get those chances. The Germans have an up and coming rugby squad. They don't get those chances. Hong Kong doesn't get those chances. The list goes on and on of countries that will never get a chance. Namibia. The Velviches, the only time they play a top-tier rugby team is when they go to the World Cup, and they get obliterated, and they play their hearts out. And that's one problem. So the system is rigged so that only the top dozen or so teams get to play each other most of the times, and that's not – so expanding it's a problem. Second problem I have with it, Gareth, is that how can you expand Rugby World Cup when you have so many rugby unions on the verge of bankruptcy or are bankrupt? USA Rugby is bankrupt. SARU is bankrupt. Then you have the Zimbabwean rugby team goes to Tunisia to qualify for the
Australia.
World goes to the World Cup to qualify for the World Cup, and they have to sleep rough because they can't pay their hotel bill, so they're sleeping in the streets of Tunis trying to qualify for the World Cup. When you have bankrupt rugby unions and World Rugby's making money hand over fist, they're making tons of money. This was a very profitable World Cup. And then so then you also have the island nations, which have proud rugby traditions, but they barely scrape by. They can't afford to play their players. So basically, the All Blacks are not the All Blacks; they're the All Islanders. The All Blacks are not the All Blacks. They're not Kiwis. They're all these specific islanders because they make their money by playing for the All Blacks instead of playing for Tonga or Samoa or places like that. So there's more issues, but that's two of my biggest issues: is how can you expand it when you don't let the minnows play against the big boys? Because what you're going to get is you're going to get Namibia beat 87-0 by South Africa like we saw in New Zealand in 2011. So those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts on Rugby World Cup expansion?
I agree with what you're saying, and this is where I differ with the point of Augustine. I was actually in favor of him because of the global game talk. Bill Beaumont's been talking about it, but he hasn't really done it. It's always been focused on the North. And we're seeing investments in the North. We're seeing money in the North.
Yeah.
If we had more investments from the States and from other big companies that can afford this, like what we see in football teams, we could then definitely see opportunities of us playing these tier 2, 3, 4 nations more and more, because that's the current problem. We're not playing them. And I think if World Rugby, they keep saying that they're going to focus on the global game. The only two teams that they favorite or put focus in the past month or two is Japan and Fiji. And that's because they voted for Bill Beaumont. So obviously they're going to put more focus on them. But what about Tonga, who they've pretty much deserted, who need help? They're not investing in them. And you said it yourself. They've got money and they've had opportunities and they're doing a great job in the North. Why aren't they not focusing in the South or in the lower order teams that could have potential? Introducing it into the States, like we said. I mean, you were talking about your nephew not knowing what rugby is until you took him to the game. And then all of a sudden, boom, have more games, have more opportunities, and create these investment opportunities. So the Stormers having an investment for the American company, and the same thing with New Zealand, I'm all for it because it's going to give them an opportunity to expand their wings and create opportunities where they can actually hold on to their players instead of going overseas. So, yeah, I'm all for the extension of the World Cup. I think it's going to bring more opportunities to the teams. But as you say, we need to allow these guys to play more rugby and not just get thrown in to get destroyed 80-0 or 100-0. But if they're given more opportunity to play these bigger teams or introduced into tournaments, whether it's a combined Pacific team, it just allows more opportunity for them to get better. And then we can have this extension of a World Cup, which I think needs to happen. So we can introduce the sport into communities that you wouldn't have thought, like your Spain's, Romania's, Germany. The Pacific Island teams have the potential to do good within the sport. They just need to be focused on, and they're neglected. So I was hoping that Augustine was going to bring that within. Obviously, it's all good and well. It's the same with politics. You promote what you're going to do, but actually, do you do it? And that's why I loved the breakdown interview last week where Mills Muliaina put Bill Beaumont on the spot. And he said, right, you've given money to Argentina to join Super Rugby. Will you give money to Japan? Will you give money to this? And he's like, yeah, sure. We actually could, and we must. They're giving money to Japan because they got voted. But what about the other guys? They've lost the South for the first time in a while because they haven't focused on us. They're focusing on the big money up north. And I think that's the problem. And if they can create the global game properly and bring back old international tours, reduce these provincial tournaments, or have a year off and send South Africa around or send the provincial teams, the smaller teams around to grow the game, I think then we can talk of an extension because I think it should happen.
No, absolutely, I agree with you. It's that's the thing. You've got to get others in. I would say the one country that's managed to, I think the U.S. is on the rise, and that's good. But I would say the one country that's definitely managed to move up, and I wouldn't even call them a tier 2 nation anymore, is Japan. but I think it's because they put a lot of money into.
I think they're a tier one now.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're tier one. You've beaten Ireland.
Gave them that authority, I think.
You've beaten Ireland. You've beaten Scotland. You've gone undefeated in your pool stage at a World Cup.
South Africa.
Yeah, South Africa in 2015. I was getting back to that, but yeah, no, I mean, how can you be considered a tier two nation anymore? But I think the reason that Japan has done it is because they have a robust domestic, professional rugby competition, and it's made all the difference in the world. They attract. I mean, look, Fourie Dupuis played there for years. I mean, if you can get Fourie Dupuis to play in your league, you're doing something right, right?
Precisely. And I think that's the good thing. And there's money there, which is creating these opportunities. So if we can create more investments where we know there's money around this world, that we know there's big companies out there, it's just going to benefit the game. I know a lot of people say, yeah, but then it's going to turn into like what the Premier League is, et cetera, et cetera. But do it differently. Prove us wrong, and put the right people in place to control the finances. So that they still play for pride and money, of course, but keep that pride with you.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. I was trying to find a picture here, and I can't find it while we're chatting here. I was going to put a picture up with me with Sir Bill Beaumont at the Rugby World Cup. I was on a train, and I went to the loo, and I came back. I'm like, hey, Sir Bill Beaumont, how you doing? Can I get a selfie? And I had somebody take a selfie of us. This is pretty cool. I was wearing my Namibia jersey that day. It was at a game in Japan. It was
That's
cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, it was pretty awesome. What's this? Yanni says, by the way, Reese is following Gareth Mason on TikTok. She loves his videos, says he's very funny and nice, positive content. Well, there you go. How's that? That's pretty awesome.
TikTok. Yeah, that was a new thing I started about 4 months ago. That's actually doing quite well.
Well, enjoy it. Apparently, you won't be able to do that in the U.S. anymore.
Yeah, I heard about that. I wonder if he's said anything more today about that.
I don't know. I hadn't seen anything.
Look it up.
So Lynn is asking me what rugby jersey I'm wearing. I think she's just being provocative. She knows it's a Shark jersey, but I'll stand up anyway and show off my Sharks jersey.
It's a great jersey. Great jersey.
Yeah, well, and this is the one that at least the ads aren't that annoying. The Celsi fits in. And then Stanley Robson says, would like to see second-tier teams, those that finish in third and fourth place in the World Cup pool, go on to play go to a playoff for a World Cup shield during the World Cup. That would be interesting. That's kind of something like taken from the sevens. I think that'd be a nice flair and appeal for it as well. That's kind of cool. That's kind of have like a consolation prize sort of thing for the teams. Yeah, that's kind of cool. I like that.
Agreed.
All right, so Gareth, wow, we've gone almost 2 hours here. Thank you so much. We've covered a lot of ground. Listen, I'd like to invite you back if you're interested in coming back to the channel. We can do this again, and we can pick a topic.
Anytime, thank you.
All right, cool beans. Yeah. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it immensely.
I really have. It's been awesome. Thank you.
Really cool. So I'm really glad that Ronaldo made me aware of your channel. So you don't always see things. The one that I've seen on that's I really like. Do you ever watch Squidge Rugby?
Yes, I did a collaboration with him about a month ago. I love Squidge.
He's brilliant. He does a really amazing job. I like his breakdown of why the Springboks won the 2019 World Cup. I thought it was very insightful.
Yeah, no, he's phenomenal. The amount of time he puts into his content is pretty remarkable.
All right, cool beans. All right, well, Gareth, thank you so much for being my guest today on Chris White Africa. I really enjoyed it. Look forward to a future collaboration and have you back on the channel sometime in the future. And folks, if you don't know Gareth's channel, check it out. The link is below the video, right down there. It's actually there today before we did the stream, so a nice change of pace for me. Yeah, so I always recommend you go to people's channels, and then I don't have the link in there until afterwards. But it's there. Go check it out and for yourself. And by the way, if you're curious about what I said about Sia Khaleesi and cutting up jerseys and want to see that video and you haven't seen it, although I suspect most people watching right now have probably already seen it, you can find it on my channel. I was just about to put the link in, but actually that's somebody's comment. That's not going to work. I was cutting and pasting. But anyway, so Gareth, thanks a lot. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. It's evening there already, so maybe dinner time or just relaxing. I'm not sure what you got on tap, but thanks a lot and good luck. Oh, we didn't even get to your sports broadcasting career. Let's save that for the next time.
Definitely. Look forward to that.
All right, Gareth, if I get you to drop out of the meeting, and then I'll wrap up here for everybody else. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks so much. Keep well. Thank you.
All right, folks, there you go. That was Gareth Mason, a Shark supporter and a massive rugby fan and supporter from South Africa. Has his own channel on rugby, brilliant channel, and I love his motto, his marketing tag there is walking tall with the G-Man. Awesome stuff. Fascinating personality. Loves rugby, knows a lot about it, just really into sports in general. So thanks to Gareth for being my guest today on a special feature here on Chris Wide Africa. And thanks to all of you who tuned in to the channel today. Really do appreciate the support. Thank you to the Flying Boar and to the others who gave super chats. Let me just go make sure I give credit for that. I don't want to leave anybody short on that. So just a short moment, I'll get to that. I will do a stream later on. I need to go check and see what the status of the landing is taking place with the with Bob and Doug coming back from the International Space Station, touching down here in the U.S. I'll have to check into that. But I will do a stream, and we'll put the feed in the background, and then I'll offer commentary about it. And let me just get to, I want to make sure, I always like to give people credit for the super chats because it's very generous and kind of them to super chat. I know not everybody has the ability to do that, but let's see what we got here. So the Flying Boar, and I think Malcolm gave a super chat as well. Yep, the Flying Boar gave several. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 super chats. Thank you so much for that, Flying Boar. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your comments and your contributions to the conversation. Malcolm, thank you for yours. Even though you're talking about the bulls eating biltong, shark biltong for breakfast. I wonder what shark biltong tastes like. I've never had it. But we get the sentiment there. Appreciate that. And thank you to the folks who are 90 members of Chris Wide Africa. I opened up membership about a month ago, and now we have 90 members on the channel. So thank you so much for that. For those who are tuning in on a Sunday, I think that Ronaldo Host will be going on live with the Sunday service here shortly in about 6 minutes. So I'm going to wrap up here because I know a lot of those who watch the channel in here enjoy Ronaldo's programs. And thank you all for tuning in. I'll come back later tonight at the regular Night Owls edition for Stray Voltage. That will be at 3:35 Eastern Standard Time here in the U.S. and at 9:35 in South Africa and Botswana. So please tune in for that. Thank you all for this stream. And Gareth Mason, my special thanks out to you. This was a lot of fun. And wow, nearly 2 hours went by, and it seemed like it was about 10 minutes. So thank you so much for that. Folks, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you here in a little bit. And I will be carrying the touchdown of Bob and Doug from the International Space Station. Bob Benkin and, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank right now. But anyway. We'll have both those guys as they return to Earth from their sojourn at the International Space Station, folks. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch everybody a little bit later here on Chris Wide Africa.